Hello, I'm Hat, and welcome to Hat's Guerrilla News live stream, the 3/28/2018 edition. For those of you who wondered, is this going to be tomorrow or today? Because I was so stupid on Tuesday, I couldn't tell the difference between tomorrow being Wednesday and tomorrow being Thursday. There's a reason for that, but it's not that important. Um, I'm here, but I will be here tomorrow as well. I'm going to stream again at 4 p.m. Central on this channel, and I'm going to go over my views on the YouTube crackdown on gun channels and what I'm doing to support those channels. Um, I think you may be slightly surprised, to be honest. Anyway, we're going to get into the Michael Doran article in just a second, but this from the Daily Caller just came in about an hour and a half ago, and I wanted to cover it. The DOJ opens investigation into FISA abuse, FBI contacts with confidential source. Let me get rid of OBS, I apologize. There we go. Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz opened an investigation Wednesday into possible FISA abuses by the Justice Department and FBI officials and the nature of contacts between the FBI and a confidential source. The Office of the Inspector General, OIG, will initiate a review that will examine the Justice Department's and the Federal Bureau of Investigation's compliance with legal requirements and with applicable DOJ and FBI policies and procedures in applications filed with the U.S. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, FISC, relating to a certain U.S. person, DOJ spokesman John Levinsky said in a statement accompanying the announcement. Well, I think we all know who that certain U.S. person is. That would be Carter Page. And the thing that they're investigating is the use of the Steele dossier to corroborate their version of events that would allow the FISA court to issue a warrant and allow the FBI to surveil Page 3 separate times. Levinsky noted that the investigation was prompted by requests from several members of Congress and Attorney General Jeff Sessions. I would have liked to have seen a special prosecutor who had things like subpoena power and the ability to compel witnesses, but this is what we got. House Republicans recently released a memo claiming widespread abuse of the FISA process on the part of the DOJ and FBI in order to obtain a surveillance warrant on former Trump campaign associate Carter Page. There we go. The memo found that the FBI and the DOJ did not disclose the political origins of the Steele dossier in its FISA application and revealed previously undisclosed testimony from former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe that an investigation into Page would not have occurred without Steele's dossier. The left, the Democrats, have been trying to backpedal on that. They've been saying that the FISA application was gotten with other information, not just Steele's dossier. But McCabe himself, under oath, said that if without the dossier, they never would have gotten the FISA warrant. So there's no getting around that. They may have used other material, which is sketchy at best, but it was the dossier that brought it in to full fruition. Excuse me just a moment. Black Mountain. Or is it Dark Mountain? I can't even remember now, and I just made it 10 minutes ago. That's what happens when you get old. Okay, so enough of that. Let's get on to the main meat of today's story, the real collusion story by Michael Doran. Now, this appeared in the National Review back on March 13th, but I've not seen anyone cover it since I first found out about it. I've been very busy with other things, so I finally got around to giving it a thorough read, and I thought that it was important that I included it in videos on this channel. I hope you feel the same way. Now, I will warn you, this is a long read. I'm going to take a break about halfway through for 10 minutes to give everybody a chance to rest up before we finish it up. I'm not saying it's interminable, but it is going to take a while, and I don't want anyone to get sleepy or frustrated at the length of it. I will also say this is an incredibly well-written article, not from just a information standpoint, but a technical standpoint. Aside from a few repetitions of words here and there, which you're going to have in an article of this length, this is actually technically almost perfect. I found it very enjoyable to read. It's obvious that the National Review still has editors who do actual editing, as opposed to places like the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN Online, which have fired most of their editors, if not all, and have glaring mistakes in their punctuation and spelling and syntax, just all over the map. It's as if they never took English 101. But this article, perfect. Okay, let's get into it. The real collusion story, and a picture of our favorite White Houseian, Non. In a textbook example of denial and projection, Trump foes in and out of government wove a sinister yarn meant to take him down. Barack Obama keeps a close watch on his emotions. I loved Spock, he wrote in February 2015 in a presidential statement eulogizing Leonard Nimoy. Growing up in Hawaii, the young man who would later be called No Drama Obama, not now, felt a special affinity for the Vulcan first officer of the USS Enterprise. Long before being nerdy was cool, there was Leonard Nimoy, the eulogy continued. Leonard was Spock, cool, logical, big-eared, and level-headed. It is a rare occasion when Obama lets his Spock mask slip, but November 2nd, 2016 was just such a moment. 6 days before the presidential election, when addressing the Congressional Black Caucus, he stressed that the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, threatened hard-won achievements of blacks, tolerance, justice, good skills, ending mass incarceration, even democracy itself. There is one candidate who will advance those things, he said, his voice falling with emotion. And there is another candidate whose defining principle, the central theme of his candidacy, is opposition to all we've done. The open display of emotion was new, but the theme of safeguarding his legacy was not. 2 months earlier, on July 5th in Charlotte, North Carolina, Obama delivered his first stump speech for Hillary Clinton. He described his presidency as a leg in a relay race. Hillary Clinton had tried hard to pass affordable health care during Bill Clinton's administration, but she failed. The First Lady trying to pass monumental legislation. Her ambition knew no bounds, even back then. And the relay baton fell to the ground. When Obama entered the White House, he picked it up. Now, his leg of the race was coming to an end. I'm ready to pass the baton, he said, and I know that Hillary Clinton is going to take it. Well, she certainly tried. But he was less certain than he was letting on. Hillary Clinton was up in the polls, to be sure, but she was vulnerable. 3 weeks earlier, on June 15th, a cyber attacker fashioning himself as Guccifer 2.0, more on him in a little bit, had published a cache of emails stolen from the Democratic National Committee. They proved, as supporters of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders had long alleged, that the DNC had conspired with the Clinton campaign to undermine their candidate. Sanders was still withholding his endorsement of Clinton for president, even though her nomination as a Democratic candidate was now a foregone conclusion. At the very moment when Clinton had expected the Democratic Party to unite behind her, its deepest chasm seemed to be growing wider. In contrast to Clinton, Obama held some sway over the Sanders insurgents. He came to Charlotte to urge them to support Clinton against their shared enemy, the presumptive Republican nominee for president, Donald Trump. Okay, let's get to Guccifer 2.0 for a second. There have been some people saying that he doesn't exist, some people saying that he's just a front for someone who actually did steal those documents. Documents which were not hacked, by the way. They were stolen. The Russians did not break into the system. Turns out that the DNC's password, Podesta's password for their files, for their email, was Obama 2008. Really, really cryptic. So, who is Guccifer 2.0? I won't go into any details about it, but here's his WordPress blog page. I've linked it in the description to this so you can look it up later. He has documents ranging from August 21st, 2016 to the beginning, which was June 15th, 2016. He has the files listed. He has the FAQ, want to know more about Guccifer 2.0, and also a FAQ on June 30th as well. So there's stuff to read about him. There's stuff to be had. All right, let's get back to the article. The insurgency was not the only Clinton vulnerability on Obama's mind. He had come to Charlotte, in addition, to deflect attention from the news conference that James Comey, the director of the FBI, had held that morning in Washington, D.C. The investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server was complete. Right. Comey announced. The FBI would recommend no criminal charges. That was the honey. But Comey administered it with a dose of vinegar. He dwelled on Clinton's mishandling of classified material in such detail that it sounded as if he was laying the foundation for an indictment. The decision not to charge Clinton, his statement signaled, was an exercise in prosecutorial restraint, not a true exoneration. Let's keep in mind two things about that. First of all, we know that Peter Strzok changed the Comey memo from gross negligence, and I believe 5 instances, to extreme carelessness. Gross negligence is the defining part of the statute for illegal activity with sensitive documents, but extreme carelessness does not meet the criminal statute. So they were in the bag for Hillary, obviously. The other thing is, Comey is not a prosecutor. He is an investigator. He is a cop. Cops don't decide whether or not prosecutions occur. It's up to the Attorney General. Now, we know that the Attorney General was also in the bag for the Clintons. Obviously, Loretta Lynch met with Bill Clinton in the famous tarmac meeting in, I believe it was Phoenix, and they were supposedly talking about golf, Brexit, and grandkids. But yeah, nah, obviously not. I believe it was, hey, your wife's in the clear. We're not going to prosecute her. Oh, gee, thanks. Here's $50,000. I'm conjecturing, of course, but how far off can I be? From the perspective of the voters, Clinton's twin email travails, the hack of the DNC and the investigation into her server, were two faces of a single problem. Call it Clinton Incorporated. Sanders and Trump were painting Clinton as Wall Street's darling, the establishment candidate, which she was. She was the greatest defender and a prime beneficiary of a rigged political and financial system. True again. Comey's statement had played directly into the hands of the Sanders insurgents. It left the distinct impression that laws are for the little people. They simply don't apply to Hillary Clinton because, well, she's Hillary Clinton. Remember the cries of, well, she's a private citizen, that you're hearing from the pundits on CNN and MSNBC, that we can't go after her for illegal activity, blatantly illegal activity, because she's no longer in government. No. Which points to Obama's third and final job at Charlotte, humanizing the Queen. I saw how she treated everyone with respect, even the folks who aren't quote-unquote important, Obama testified. Look up Hillary and Secret Service, or Hillary and White House maid, for some anecdotes about that. He enlarged Clinton's humility before the crowd because it was invisible to the naked eye. With his jacket and tie off, the cuffs of his sleeves turned, and a winning smile spread from ear to ear, Obama came to loan Hillary Clinton his common touch. Passing the baton to her was a team effort, however. It demanded hard work from countless enablers. These included not just Democrats, but also many Republicans, who shared the conviction that Trump represented an extraordinary threat to our democracy. Desperate times call for desperate measures. To block Trump, Clinton's supporters bent rules and broke laws. They went to surprising lengths to strengthen her while framing him, both in the sense of depicting him in a particular light and of planting evidence against him. When it comes to ongoing FBI criminal investigations, presidents typically refrain from describing their preferred outcomes. They fear the appearance of exerting undue influence over Lady Justice. But in the case of Hillary Clinton's email abuses, Obama made an exception. She would never intentionally put America in any kind of jeopardy, he remarked in a TV interview in April 2016. She had displayed a carelessness in terms of managing emails, he allowed, but I also think it is important to keep this in perspective. Carelessness in terms of managing emails. She literally stole classified, top secret, and what's the last one? Special program intelligence emails from the from the specifically designed and secure servers at the State Department, and she put them on a private and for 3 months unencrypted email server of her own. I would not term that as carelessness in terms of managing emails. In fact, if she's so careless, how did she manage to completely erase over 30,000 of those emails when it came time for her to turn the server over to the FBI? How indeed? 2 words, BITCHUTE. Well-intentioned but careless, said the commander-in-chief. 3 months later, the FBI finished its investigation and James Comey arrived at an identical conclusion. Although we did not find clear evidence that Secretary Clinton or her colleagues intended to violate laws governing the handling of classified information, he said in his July 5th statement, there is evidence that they were extremely careless, extremely careless, in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information. Well-intentioned but careless, Comey was locked in a Vulcan mind meld with his boss. As a political move, highlighting Clinton's intentions was astute. It had a common-sense feel. Americans instinctively take intentions into account when determining guilt. As a strict matter of law, however, it was vapid. The mishandling of classified information falls into the category of a non-intent crime. It's a type of objective recklessness, like running over a pedestrian while blowing through a red light. Violations of this sort trigger criminal liabilities regardless of the offender's state of mind. So, it's not intent, it's what happened that counts. She lost those emails. They were stolen. And she was not using a .gov email system. She was using a private system, which Obama knew because he was communicating with her on that system using an alias. No intent. Pathetic. She was running Clinton Incorporated through the State Department, pay for play, arms deals, slush funds for the Clinton Initiative and the Clinton Foundation, Clinton Global Initiative, excuse me. That's what was going on there. And Obama just turned his back to it, excuse me. But let's assume that some clever lawyer in the Department of Justice discovered a very learned and superficially compelling rationale for applying Obama's fictive standard of intent. Even so, Hillary Clinton couldn't clear the hurdle. The sheer volume of classified material the FBI recovered from her server constituted proof of intent. 52 email chains contain classified information, Comey said. Particularly damning was the form this material took. It is impossible to paste a classified document into an unclassified email accidentally, and because the 3 computer systems, unclassified, confidential, secret, and top secret, are physically separate networks, each feeding into an independent hard drive on the user's desk. They're not just going to move from one place to another. They have to be physically gathered and placed there. If a classified document appears in an unclassified email, then someone downloaded it onto a thumb drive and manually uploaded it to the unclassified network, an intentional act if there ever was one. One of Clinton's emails suggests that downloading and uploading material in this fashion was a commonplace activity in her office. In June 2011, a staffer encountered difficulty transmitting a document to her by means of a classified system. An impatient Clinton instructed him to strip the classified markings from the document and send it on as an unclassified email. Turn into non-paper with no identifying heading and send non-secure, Clinton instructed. No intent. On 3 separate occasions, staffers got sloppy and failed to strip the non-papers of all markings that betrayed their classified origins. The FBI recovered one email, for example, that contained a C in parenthesis in the margin, an obvious sign that the corresponding paragraph was classified confidential. When an agent personally interviewed Clinton on July 2nd, he showed her the document and asked whether she understood what the C meant. For anyone who has ever held a security clearance, C's in the margins are more ubiquitous than C's on faucets, water faucets, and no more baffling. But Clinton played the ditzy grandmother, Secretary of State, and she plays it off as if, oh, I don't understand. She had simply assumed, she said, that the C was marking an item in an alphabetized list. In the 2,500-year life of the alphabet, this was a first, a list that started with the 3rd letter and contained but a single item. The explanation was laughable, but any sensible answer would have constituted an acknowledgement of malicious intent. Her only out was the well-intentioned but careless script that Obama had written for her. In other words, she lied to the FBI, a felony offense. How many other people have lied to the FBI recently? Well, let's just look at one who's come up pretty recently. Andrew McCabe, former deputy director of the FBI. Retiring at 50, and oh, lo and behold, he lied to Congress and he lied to the FBI investigators under oath about leaks. And let's see, what else was there? It might have just been the leaks to the press that he was providing during the Clinton email exchange. Now, let's be fair. He was disseminating information that was harmful to Clinton. It was not against Trump, but still, it's against the law. It's against the law. It's against the rules of the FBI. He knew that. Comey knew it, but they did it anyway. So now you've got McCabe on the hook for a felony, and you've got Comey on the hook for a felony too, notwithstanding his releasing those memos that he supposedly wrote after meeting with Trump, memos that were classified FBI documents that he released to an intermediary who then released them to the press. But let's see if anything happens to that. I mean, let's see, who was it? Flynn. Flynn lied to the FBI in an interview. Had nothing to do with his with any Russian collusion. It had to do with a meeting with, I believe, Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, and he's going to jail unless Trump pardons him. And Papadopoulos, again, hit for lying to the FBI about a meeting with a Russian cutout. And it had nothing to do with getting Trump winning the election. But you'll hear people hold those up as truths that Trump did collude with Russia. But, you know, they're going to jail. What's happening to McCabe and Comey and Clinton and Uma Abedin? Nothing so far. Nothing. Before she ever told this howler, however, Comey had already prepared a draft of his statement exonerating her. The FBI let Clinton skate, and we've read about that memo being produced, I believe, 4 weeks before he came out and said that she was not going to be prosecuted. So, again, I hate to reuse phrases, but still, they were in the bag for Hillary from the start. Why were they leaking that information, though? I think that'll come up later. But give Comey his due. If he had followed the letter of the law, the trail of guilt may have led all the way to Obama himself. As Andrew C. McCarthy has demonstrated at National Review Online, Obama used a dummy email account to communicate with Clinton, as I said earlier, via her private server. Did this make Obama complicit in Clinton's malfeasance? Anyone in Comey's position would have thought twice before moving to prosecute her, and not only because the case might have ensnared the president himself. The FBI must enforce the law, but it must also be seen to be enforcing it. As a rule, these two imperatives buttress each other. During the 2016 election, Comey faced extraordinary circumstances. If he had followed the law to the letter, he would have toppled the leading candidate for president and decapitated the Democratic Party. Well, that's pretty much happened. Clinton supporters, more than 50% of the electorate, would have erupted in outrage, screaming that a politicized FBI had thrown the election to Donald Trump. And that's exactly correct. There would have been panic. Mayhem in the streets? I don't know, but definitely panic among the Democrats. Guarding the Bureau's reputation for impartiality is a serious concern, but it is nevertheless a thoroughly political concern. Comey would have us believe that it was a unique moment in his career, the singular entry into the political arena of an otherwise apolitical servant of the law. Truth be told, Comey loves being in the thick of it, but not because he is a partisan brawler. He is not. It is the drama that he relishes, the grand stage. His favorite role is that of Joe Friday, the no-nonsense lawman, the guardian of legal processes before the encroachments of dirty politicians. Joe Friday, however, was a simple detective, a confirmed bachelor, content to live quietly with his mother and his parakeet. And of course, he was TV fiction. In real life, humble straight shooters get clobbered with a brick before they ever reach the limelight. In real life, snagging the big part often requires the equivalent of leading a bloody horse head in the producer's bed. A beautiful, beautiful Godfather reference. And it requires a supportive staff. Mid-year exam, the code name for the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails, I had not heard that before, relied on a team of men and women with the right stuff, a quality that is hard to define but easy to recognize. By the way, if you're into books at all, if you like novels, you should really read The Right Stuff. It was a great movie, but it is an incredible novel. Very well written. Outstanding, especially if you like flying or the space program at all. There's a lot of incredible information in it, and it's a very fun read. I strongly suggest you pick it up. The Right Stuff did not require strong Democratic credentials, but they certainly helped. Andrew McCabe, previously mentioned, the deputy director of the FBI, led the team. McCabe was not your FBI gumshoe of old. He spent no time in his younger days chasing bank robbers in Des Moines. He was part of a new breed, the post-9/11 FBI leadership, for whom the career fast track was counterterrorism. He came of age at the intersection of law enforcement with national security, shuttling between D.C. and New York. Along the way, he developed a valuable personal network. His wife, Jill, ran as a Democrat for a Virginia state Senate seat in 2015. The political organization of Virginia's Governor Terry McAuliffe, one of Hillary Clinton's very closest associates, gave her nearly $500,000. And that is being treated with a bit of scrutiny right now. Terry McAuliffe is under investigation for that loan. Gift. Perhaps more important than having Democratic credentials was having a heightened understanding of the needs of senior leadership, in the FBI certainly, but also in the DOJ. Right across the street from the J. Edgar Hoover building sat Attorney General Loretta Lynch. She would be scrutinizing mid-year exam in every detail. Let me stop for just a second. The J. Edgar Hoover building. Yes, J. Edgar Hoover started the FBI from scratch, and he was its director for, I can't remember how many decades, at least 5. 4. But he was a bastard. He held files on everyone. He investigated anyone who he thought he could use to help keep his power running. He investigated presidents, he investigated senators. You may have heard of COINTELPRO, the program where he infiltrated organizations, protest organizations during the Vietnam War and in the 70s, things like the Black Panthers um, and others that escape my mind at the moment. Not just black organizations, but white student organizations too. The old joke is if you were in a secret society and there were four people, three of them were FBI agents. It was incredibly illegal, but that's his legacy. And he still has that building named after him. If we can tear down statues of Andrew Jackson and demand that George Washington be chipped off Mount Rushmore because he owned slaves, then why does J. Edgar Hoover get to keep his name on a building? Uh, I'm sorry, a tangent, but it still bothers me. She would be She would be scrutinizing mid-year exam in every detail, and not just Lynch. Hillary Clinton herself would be watching closely, and would be brought in for questioning too. Being willing and able to treat her with kid gloves was essential. She, quote, might be our next president, unquote, team member Lisa Page reminded Peter Strzok, the agent in charge of mid-year exam. Referring to Clinton's upcoming FBI interview, Page wrote, the last thing you need us going in there loaded for bear. Like McCabe, Strzok had pursued a career at the nexus of law enforcement and counterterrorism. But he was less overtly political. A John Kasich sympathizer, he was by nature a middle-of-the-roader and a Republican-leaning one at that. Clinton left him cold, but Trump left him even colder, and his active personal life helped concentrate his mind with that antipathy. Strzok was having an affair with Page, who was an FBI lawyer on McCabe's staff. Both were married. Page's politics were typical of highly educated people in D.C. She detested Trump and his supporters. He is, quote, a loathsome human being, unquote, she texted to Strzok, who readily agreed. After Trump captured the nomination, hostility to him quickly became part of their private idiom. If the ultimate aphrodisiac, as Henry Kissinger famously claimed, is power, then wielding it together with an illicit lover must be the pinnacle of eroticism. Together, Strzok and Page explored the power of secrets, routinely leaking to the press to shape political outcomes. Still on the phone with Devlin, Page texted to Strzok, referring to former Wall Street Journal national security reporter Devlin Barrett. Big news about the Hillary Clinton email story was breaking when Devlin and Page were on the phone together. Quote, you might want to tell Devlin he should turn on CNN. There's news on, Strzok texted back. Page, he knows. He just got handed a note. Strzok, haha. He is asking about it now? Page, yeah, it was pretty funny. Influencing the nation's politics was routine and ridiculously easy. One quick call to Devlin and boom, the world changed. Deploying secrets for a political effect, deciding which to keep, which to tell, and how to tell them, was a task that they approached with alacrity. The ultimate goal, of course, was not propping up Hillary Clinton so much as maximizing the power and autonomy of the FBI. In pursuing this goal, McCabe and the two lovers demonstrated the very essence of the right stuff, a breezy comfort with bending the law to the demands of politics. They honed their skills on mid-year exam, as that test ended and an even bigger one loomed before them. At the end of July, Comey and McCabe would officially open an investigation into Russian meddling in the election, including possible coordination between Russia and the Trump campaign. On July 5th, the day of Comey's press conference on Clinton's emails, a former British spy, Christopher Steele, flew to Rome to meet an old FBI contact. The information he brought had weighty implications for the impending investigation, but neither the information nor the implications are what we have been led to believe. Steele, a former British spy and Russia expert, was working on contract to Fusion GPS, a Washington-based public relations firm, which in turn was on contract to a D.C. law firm, Perkins Coie, which in turn was on contract to the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. Now let's be clear about this. Steele started working on the dossier after the Washington Free Beacon pulled its support for Trump dirt through Fusion GPS. The left will say that the dossier, is the result of funding by the Washington Free Beacon, which I believe was supporting Ted Cruz at the time. It was certainly against Trump by far. No, no. After the primaries, I should say after it became clear that Trump was going to win the primaries, the Washington Free Beacon pulled out of that deal with Fusion GPS. The DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign together put funds into this dossier creation and got Steele rolling on it. There was no Steele dossier before the Clinton and DNC money came rolling in. Let me start over there. Steele, a former British spy and a Russia expert, was working on contract to Fusion GPS, a Washington-based public relations firm, which in turn was on contract to a D.C. law firm, which in turn was on contract to the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. Steele, that is to say, was working for Hillary Clinton. His job, among other things, was to collect opposition research on Trump from his network of Russian sources. When Steele arrived in Rome, his famous dossier did not exist. The dossier, as we have come to know it, is some 17 reports that he compiled between June and December 2016. In early July, Steele had been working on the Clinton account for only a few weeks and had written but one report, dated June 20th. It claimed that Trump was Vladimir Putin's Manchurian candidate. The Russian regime has been cultivating, supporting, and assisting Trump for at least 5 years, Steele reported. Putin's goal was to sow discord and disunity both within the U.S. itself, but more especially within the transatlantic alliance. Well, we know that's true. That's one of the few things in the Steele dossier that you can say is corroborated. But that's public knowledge. There's nothing in that dossier that is private or unknown through general public information that has been corroborated. Not one piece. And a number of them have been outright and blatantly disproven. Like, who was it? Page's trip to Vienna. Page has never been to Vienna. Carter Page, never been to Vienna. The Russian leader supported Trump mainly by supplying valuable intelligence on his opponents, including Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. Putin had offered lucrative financial contracts, but Trump had turned them down. The wily Russian, however, had managed to get his hooks into Trump due to the Americans' quote-unquote sexual perversion. Having sex with porn stars and Playboy models, I wouldn't call that a perversion. I'd call that an active sex life. During a visit to Moscow in 2013, Trump had hired prostitutes to stay with him in the same hotel suite used by the Obamas on one of their trips. Turns out that hotel does not have a suite named the presidential suite, which Steele claimed. He didn't even get the room right. The FSB, Russia's secret police, had fitted the room with cameras and recording equipment. The FSB is well known for doing that all over the place. If they have any kind of notice whatsoever of where you're going to be, or they can steer you to one of their recording rooms, they will do it in a heartbeat. Trump had the prostitutes defile Obama's bed by putting on a golden shower performance for him. All of it was caught on tape. That golden shower performance, okay, mute your speaker if you're at work, because this is not a safe for work statement, but that golden shower performance is why the Steele dossier is known in some circles as the Piss dossier. Earth-shaking news. Vladimir Putin was blackmailing Donald J. Trump. No doubt, Steele's FBI handler rushed this report to his superiors in Washington, D.C. They, in turn, raced it straight to Obama's desk. Sorry, wrong. According to the New York Times, as Andrew Klavan likes to say, a former newspaper, Steele's explosive revelations wound their way to the J. Edgar Hoover building only slowly. It took weeks before they appeared in Strzok's inbox. Why? Why does that stop working from time to time? Excuse me. Mike Morell, the former deputy director of the CIA, helps explain the delay. Morell did some digging into Christopher Steele's dossier and shared the results of his research at a public forum in Washington, D.C. in March 2017. Steele, according to Morell, did not have direct access to the Russians whom he labeled as his quote-unquote sources, people who included former officers in the FSB. He communicated with them, if that is the right word, through paid intermediaries who paid the so-called sources. He never met directly with any of his alleged sources. It was all through intermediaries. If you know anything about the Russians, that will raise severe, no pun intended, red flags, and we'll get into that in just a second. The chances of Steele having been played were thus great. Morell explained it like this. If you're paying somebody, particularly former FSB officers, they're going to tell you truth and innuendo and rumor, and they're going to call you up and say, hey, let's have another meeting. I have more information for you, because they want to get paid some more. This process, Morell said, takes you nowhere. So here is a professional, former spy, now a professional investigator with close ties to Russia, and he's being, according to Morell, probably led down the primrose path, probably being played for a fool. Yet, well, we all know what was done with the Steele dossier, so it boggles the mind. Steele's report was, in a word, junk, and Morell, the man who expressed that opinion, was not just a seasoned intelligence professional, he was also a staunch supporter of Hillary Clinton for president. Nor did Steele's FBI handler in Rome set off an alarm in Washington because he, presumably, was also a seasoned professional who knew junk when he saw it. And he had many additional reasons to doubt the veracity of Steele's reporting, reasons that Morell refrained from broaching. How, for example, could Steele be sure that the former FSB officers in his network were fully retired? The convoluted pipeline between Moscow and London gave Russian intelligence too many opportunities to inject disinformation into the flow of reports to London. And let's not neglect the glaring issue of plausibility. When in the history of the rivalry between the West and Russia has it been possible for a British spy to call up sources in Moscow and gain immediate access to the deepest secrets of the Kremlin? Steele, relying only on his wits, unearthed gems the likes of which glittered only in the dreams of the CIA, Mossad, and MI6, the greatest intelligence-gathering organizations on Earth. To believe that tale, we must assume that Steele, like James Bond, is no ordinary secret agent. He's a super spy. There's a movie that needs to be made. Then there's the little matter of Steele's personal bias. According to one well-informed associate, Steele was passionate about preventing Trump from winning the election. His financial incentives, of course, oriented him in exactly the same direction. He was a paid piper, and he got paid only for collecting information detrimental to Trump. Isn't it possible, likely even, that his shadowy paymasters in the demi-monde of the Clinton campaign were calling the tune? Okay, let's pause for a second and look at the word demi-monde. I kind of knew what it meant when I first read it, but I looked it up just to be sure. And what I found was pretty funny. First of all, the main definition, as I've highlighted here, a group whose respectability is dubious or whose success is marginal, the literary demi-monde of ghostwriters, hacks, and publicists, also called demi-world. So here we could say the political world of hacks, public relations firms, and liars. But here's the part that I really loved. The primary definition: a class of women kept by wealthy lovers or protectors. I'd say that hums, Freudian slip. I'd say that sums up Hillary pretty well. This next one I'm not going to make any comment on. I'm just going to put it there as it's written. Women prostitutes considered as a group. Okay, back to the story. Steele's reports certainly harmonized beautifully with the campaign's propaganda. On June 2nd, in a speech in San Diego, Hillary Clinton unveiled her main line of attack on Donald Trump's foreign policy. His ideas, she said, were dangerously incoherent. In fact, they weren't even really ideas, just a series of bizarre rants, personal feuds, and outright lies. Particularly mystifying was his attitude towards the Russian dictator. He said if he were grading Vladimir Putin as a leader, he'd give him an A. I'll leave it to the psychiatrist to explain his affections for tyrants. Which isn't actually an invalid point, wholly. But the demi-monde wasn't about to leave it to mental health professionals. It hired instead a British super spy. He immediately explained that Putin was extorting Trump. 2 weeks after that, he flew to Rome to share his explanation with the FBI. By the time he left Rome, his handler might not have guessed that the Clinton campaign was funding the spy's work. The political nature of Steele's mission, however, would have been obvious. In Rome on July 5th, the FBI was beginning to acquire a new secret, but it was not the one contained in Steele's report. The Clinton campaign, the FBI would soon learn with certainty, was intent on framing Trump as Putin's puppet. That secret was truly explosive and perhaps thrilling for the two lovers on McCabe's staff. In time, all of them, Strzok, Page, McCabe, and Comey, would all mishandle it, damaging their careers irreparably. In July, however, they were not yet in a rush to ruination. The team with the right stuff cautiously watched and waited. Not until September would they take their fateful missteps. Again, an aside, apologies for not mentioning this before. The Right Stuff was written by Tom Wolfe. He has an incredible catalog. I've read every one of his books, including Bonfire of the Vanities, which was a very interesting book, but one of the worst movies ever made. It tanked Tom Hanks' career for quite some time. But again, an aside. On July 22nd, WikiLeaks released the largest cache of DNC emails. The plan behind the hack now became clear: to sabotage the Democratic National Convention, which opened in Philadelphia on July 25th. While Clinton was organizing a celebration of Democratic unity, Guccifer 2.0 was working to flood the convention floor with enraged Bernie Sanders insurgents. In the event, Clinton managed to prevent the protests from ruining the convention, but they did damage her theater of power, and they also handed Trump a fresh opportunity to broadcast his Crooked Hillary theme, one of the great hooks of a political campaign. He took obvious delight in the rage of the Sanders followers. Quote, an analysis showed that Bernie Sanders would have won the Democratic nomination if it were not for these superdelegates, unquote, Trump tweeted on the eve of the convention. The statement hit Clinton like an iron bar to her kneecap. The thought that a malevolent foreign actor was helping Trump deliver the blow only increased the pain. Most observers assumed that Russian state-backed hackers stood behind Guccifer 2.0, an assumption that has grown stronger with time. If Trump felt sheepish about benefiting from such people, he hit it well. I will tell you this, Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing, he said on July 27th, referring to Hillary Clinton's messages that the FBI never recovered during its investigation of her private server, and we discussed those earlier. In the eyes of his supporters, Trump's appeal to Putin was a stage whisper, a mock gesture, and a pointed dig at Clinton. And if you watch that in its full context, he did say it playfully. There was no, hey, Russia, I need those emails kind of effort into that phrase. It was tossed offhand. It truly was. In her rush to hide emails from the FBI, Trump implied, she had delivered them up to Putin on a platter. But his brand of humor was lost on Clinton and her team. To them, the appeal to Putin was sinister. I think that's just beyond the pale, said Clinton loyalist and former CIA Director Leon Panetta. To shame Trump before the voters, the campaign shifted its rhetoric perceptibly. In June, Clinton had depicted Trump's attitude towards Putin as irrational. Now the two were said to be in a partnership. A bromance was how John Podesta, Clinton's campaign chairman, described it. This has to be the first time that a major presidential candidate has actively encouraged a foreign power to conduct espionage against his political opponent, said senior Clinton policy aide Jake Sullivan. This has gone from being a matter of curiosity and a matter of politics to being a national security issue. Well, we do know that the Clinton campaign sought dirt on Trump from Eastern Bloc countries during the campaign cycle, but that was okay because it's Hillary. Shaming was all well and good, but it only resonated among committed voters. Winning the election required convincing independents that Trump was more than just a passive beneficiary of the DNC hack. He had to be an accomplice. Clinton's campaign thus posted 5 questions on its website. What's behind Trump's fascination with Vladimir Putin? Why does Trump surround himself with advisors with links to the Kremlin? Why do Trump's foreign policy ideas read like a Putin wish list? Do Trump's still secret tax returns show ties to Russian oligarchs? Why is Trump encouraging Russia to interfere in our election? Hilarious. Every one of them hilarious. The one I like the best is, why do Trump's foreign policy ideas read like a Putin wish list? I'll just turn that back on you, assuming I'll give you that. I'll just say that they were a Putin wish list. I don't agree, but let's just say they were. Hillary's foreign policy ideas read like a nightmare for Russia. An absolute, I'm going to clobber you with everything we've got nightmare. For instance, if she wanted to set up a no-fly zone over Syria, and if Russian planes entered it, we were going to shoot them down. World War III. At least a very, very heightened proxy war in Syria. We would have been pouring in thousands and thousands of troops. And my favorite is her explanation that if we were ever cyber attacked by Russia, she would treat that as an act of war. Now we know about the 13 trolls who were indicted, last month in the Mueller rollout of that investigation. But we treated it as what it was, a inconsequential act. They're never going to be extradited. They're never going to be tried. So we did what we could. I'm questioning why the FBI didn't come out with it sooner, but that's my own opinion. However, to get back to the main thrust of this, Hillary had said, again, that it would be an act of war. So I tweeted once when I heard that we found out that the Russians had a hacking farm in a old barn outside of Kiev, and that the Poseidon missiles were on their way. My dad didn't find that very funny. He was a Hillary supporter. God bless him. I disagree, but that's his right. Each question was followed by a short answer, leading to the inevitable conclusion that Trump was actively conspiring with Putin. And so the collusion thesis was born. The website did not spell out the details of the conspiracy, but the campaign's demimonde left nothing to the imagination. Christopher Steele had discovered Russian sources who painted a vivid picture of the plot. Sources is, of course, in quotes. Putin had decided against releasing the compromising videos of Trump. The Manchurian candidate was proving just too beneficial to Russia. In fact, a full-blown alliance had formed between Putin and Trump. Based on their quote-unquote mutual interest in defeating Hillary Clinton, they struck a grand bargain. Putin would help elect Trump, who would deliver a supine American policy on Ukraine and NATO defense. Unlike Obama's supine policy on the Ukraine and NATO defense. Again, if Obama did it, it was diplomacy, it was leadership. If Trump does it, it's the end of the world. The super spy's network was remarkable. His Russian sources were as close to Trump as they were to Putin. An ethnic Russian close associate of Trump's admitted that there were admitted that there was a well-developed conspiracy between him and the Russians. Another source revealed more. The DNC hack was carried out with the full knowledge and support of Trump and senior members of his campaign team. There it was, the proof that the Clinton campaign needed. The great crime against Hillary Clinton was a joint Russian-American operation, and Trump was in on it from the beginning. Steele's startling discoveries hardly stop there. But before revealing more, let's pause and consider the purpose of his reports. How precisely did his direct employer, Fusion GPS, use them? Now, before I get into this, let's talk about what just happened yesterday, where the Trump administration expelled 60 Russian diplomats, which with Russia means spies, back to Russia. Massive. I don't remember the last time that we did that big of a push of Russians from their embassies. They're going to have to close probably one of their embassies because so many people have been sent back. I think maybe the closest we've come in recent memory is back when it was determined that the Seattle Russian embassy was, or consulate, I think it's called, was spying on local politicians and local groups, and they were caught destroying thousands and thousands of pages of intelligence. You could see the burn bags going off on the roof of the consulate. I don't remember how many we ejected at that time, though. Back to the story. To hear Glenn Simpson tell it, his company Fusion GPS is a research organization. What we do is provide people with factual information, he told the Senate Judiciary Committee in August 2017. Our specialty is public record information. In truth, Simpson's true specialty is not research, but persuasion, more specifically, persuasion of reporters. He has a talent for convincing journalists to publish stories, true or not, that benefit his clients. In short, he is a public relations flack. Again, fitting the demi-monde definition perfectly. But Simpson is no ordinary PR man. He's a super flack. Super flack, super spy. In the first decade of this century, he was in his early 40s and working as an investigative journalist for the Wall Street Journal. High marks. He was reaching the pinnacle of his profession just as the internet was gutting the print media. Simpson, however, had a marketable talent. I call it journalism for rent, he said at a public forum in August 2017. Journalism, as we once knew, might be dead, but deep-pocketed clients still needed to get stories into the press, and they needed to block other stories from being published. Simpson knew almost every member of the Washington Press Corps personally, and he understood the constraints under which they worked, what it took to get a story past an editor. He handed them canned articles. They got scoops. He got happy clients. When pitching stories on Trump-Putin collusion, Simpson eventually discovered the great benefit of placing Christopher Steele directly in front of reporters. In September and October, he would fly the spy from London to the United States so the two of them could brief major media outlets as a team. Before that, in July and August, Simpson did not have the benefit of Steele's physical presence, but neither was he alone. He still had the super spy's reports, James Bond in a briefcase. Con men stoked the greed of their marks by letting them catch glimpses of suitcases bulging with cash. This is true. I know people who have had this happen to them. In fact, it happened to me. I lost $3,300 in a scam. Not very proud of it, but people are people. I thought I was going to make a lot of money. I fronted that, and within a month it was all gone, and I never saw a dime again. In fact, I lost even more money trying to prop the damn enterprise up on my own. Sorry. Simpson gave his marks a sense that he was similarly loaded, but with valuable information, not money. In September 2016, Steele and I met in Washington and discussed the information now known as the dossier, wrote Jonathan Weiner in the Washington Post. A former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Weiner admitted passing Steele's information to his superiors. I was allowed to review, but not to keep a copy of these reports enable me to alert the State Department, he explained. Simpson, we infer, would let journalists catch a glimpse of the super spy's quote-unquote raw intelligence. Then he would quickly take the document back because, you understand, it was just too sensitive to leave lying around. If journalists feared that Steele's startling reports, such as, for example, the one about the Golden Shower, contained Russian disinformation, Simpson had a well-rehearsed spiel at the ready to reassure them. He inadvertently shared it before the House Intelligence Committee in November 2017. Steele, Simpson explained, hey Lucy, move the tail, had a standard presentation for journalists to explain how he avoided falling prey to the diabolical Russians. Sliding into the first person, he rattled off Steele's lines. To quote his testimony, I was the lead Russianist at MI6 in the final years of my career, and I was previously stationed in Moscow, and I speak Russian, and I've done Russian intelligence, counterintelligence issues all my life. And the central problem when you're a Russian intelligence expert is disinformation, and that the Russians have a long history and an advanced capability in disinformation. And so, before we go any further, I just want you to know that this is the fundamental problem with my profession. Got something in my throat, excuse me. I got to avoid coughing into the microphone and blowing out your headphones. Let me start with that last sentence. And so, before we go any further, I just want you to know that this is the fundamental problem with my profession, and it should be assumed that in any sort of intelligence gathering, there will be some disinformation, and I'm trained to spot that and filter it out. But you should understand that no one's perfect. And there you go. This is how you let people know that you know what you think you know, but not what the Russians want you to know. Simpson then switched to the first-person plural. Perhaps when briefing journalists, this was the point at which he would speak in his own voice, as the leader of the talented and experienced team at Fusion GPS. And so, we've essentially filtered out everything that we think is disinformation, and we're not going to present that to you here. We're going to present to you the things that we think come from credible sources, but we're not going to warrant, to you, that this is all true. Simpson staked the credibility of the dossier on just one thing, Steele's super awesomeness. On his own, Simpson would have been flacking salacious rumor, but paired with Steele, he was briefing credible intelligence. Together, they became a super duo. The purpose of the dossier would change over time. In July and August, the goal was not to get Steele's reports directly into the press. Nobody knew better than Simpson, a highly experienced reporter, that Steele's claims were unverifiable and therefore unprintable. The best he could achieve was an article that reinforced the main suppositions of the collusion thesis, an article such as Trump and Putin, a Love Story, which David Remnick, the editor of The New Yorker, wrote and published in early August. Putin sees in Trump a grand opportunity, Remnick explained. He sees in Trump weakness and ignorance, a confused mind. He has every hope of exploiting him. A billionaire real estate developer who weathered 2 real estate crashes is, what was that again? Weakness and ignorance, a confused mind. Okay. Remnick stopped just short of claiming that Putin was actually blackmailing Trump, but his depiction of their relations matched, in general, the story that emerged from Steele's reports. Remnick took pains, for example, to instruct readers. The gathering of compromising material, is a familiar tactic in Putin's arsenal. For years, the Russian intelligence services have filmed political enemies in stages of sexual and or narcotic indulgence and have distributed the grainy images online. Like Marion Barry smoking crack with a prostitute and somehow still getting reelected as mayor a few years later? Did Remnick personally rely on a Fusion GPS briefing? We do not know. Jane Meyer, a staff writer for The New Yorker, recently confessed that she received a briefing in September directly from super spy himself, so the potential for communication certainly existed. Regardless of what inspired Remnick, his approach represented a win for Simpson. If, with the help of the dossier or any other tool of persuasion, he could convince journalists that Putin was blackmailing Trump with compromising videos, then it was just that much easier to convince them to report stories about, say, the danger to the Western alliance that Trump represented, a story that would require nothing more than stringing together a few quotes from Trump with a few ominous warnings from foreign policy experts. The dossier, in short, helped Simpson sell a master narrative. By choosing to convince voters that Trump was somehow an accomplice to the DNC hack, the Clinton campaign had set itself a difficult challenge, defining the role of Putin's American partners in crime. After all, the hack did not require the assistance of a Tom Cruise character. No one broke into DNC headquarters, crawled through a ventilator shaft, rappelled from a cable, and slid a disk into a hard drive. I don't know how you could slide a disk into a hard drive, but in fact, nobody uses optical drives anymore at all, so I really don't know where that came from, but he's a reporter, not a computer guy, so we'll give him some slack. The hackers carried out the operation unilaterally, electronically, and probably from offshore. They required no accomplices on American soil. Okay, that's just flat out wrong. That's flat out wrong. The metadata from the WikiLeaks emails has shown that it was impossible for them to have been downloaded across a international line or even a American server to the DNC server. It had to have been done locally, directly from the server or from a computer containing the emails themselves. There's no other way it could have happened. I don't know how the author, Michael Doran, missed that fact. I really don't. Between the forensicator and VIPS, a group of former intelligence analysts and electronic experts, the hack story has been proven completely false. They were stolen. They were just flat out stolen. It's about the one true mistake in this article I can find. Steele solved this problem by finding sources who revealed that the crucial contributions of Trump's team came in the planning stages. As it turns out, Steele reported, the idea to hack the DNC actually originated from the American side. It was Trump's team that defined the objective of the operation, leaking the DNC emails to WikiLeaks during the Democratic convention in order to swing supporters of Bernie Sanders away from Hillary Clinton and across to Trump. That's a quote from the Trump team. This report solved half of the Clinton campaign's problem. I'm sorry, let me back that up. I think I may have misread that. No, that quote was from the Trump team. I'm sorry, I thought for a second it was a Hillary quote about the Trump team. Flat out lie, in other words. I was wrong. Please excuse me. This report solved half of the Clinton campaign problem. It established Trump's guilt, but a conspiracy can't grab the popular imagination if it is devoid of actual conspirators. Here again, the super spy sources came to the rescue. On the day-to-day level, the job of managing the Trump-Putin collusion fell to Paul Manafort, who at the time was still Trump's campaign manager, and now seriously in trouble for tax evasion and money laundering. But not with anything to do with the Russians. I believe it was with his dealings with the Ukraine, possibly Turkey. But Manafort was not the architect of the DNC hack. Fortunately, the super spy was running a mole who was able to identify that criminal genius. The plot, Steele reported, quote, was conceived and promoted by Trump's foreign policy advisor, Carter Page. Poor, put upon, and absolutely maligned Carter Page. Here's the super spy's vaunted ability to filter out Russian disinformation appears to have failed him. Carter Page, who is no relation to Lisa Page on McCabe's team, played a negligible role in the campaign. The Trump people had placed him on a team of foreign policy advisors, to be sure, but they had thrown the group together in haste to counter the accusation that the campaign lacked an expert bench. Page did not know Trump personally. He worked in finance with a focus on investing in Russia's energy sector, but he had no noticeable achievements to his name. A former boss described him, very unkindly, as a gray spot, a man without any special talents or accomplishments. Steele's allegations against Page make sense only in a Marvel Comics universe. I'm a DC guy myself. Carter Page, by day, a mild-mannered businessman, by night, a diabolical mastermind. The role that the super spy ascribed to Page may have been absurd, but what choice did he have? The conspiracy needed a face. That person had to have plausible connections to Russia, plus a certain amount of visibility. In Trump's orbit, there were only two candidates, Manafort and Page. Manafort's ties, however, were to Ukraine, not Russia, and he was too well known. He had been working in Washington since the Reagan era. Page, by contrast, had direct connections to Russia, having lived in Moscow for some 3 years. The modesty of his career was actually a plus, because Clinton's propagandists could present it as shadowy rather than unsuccessful. For an unknown, Page was surprisingly visible. His trip to Moscow in July 2016 had received significant press attention, not the least because he had expressed opinions in favor of rapprochement with Russia and critical of American foreign policy. I believe that visit was the speech he gave to a graduating class of Russian university students. A bit of an honor, but he had worked in Russia. He was known among high circles, so it was maybe a favor extended to him. I don't know, but the fact that he spoke in front of a graduating class of Russian university students has been held up as a sign of his evilness, of his willingness to do anything for the Russians. Unfortunately, when people bring up that speech, they fail to bring up the fact that Bill Clinton gave a speech in front of Russian bankers, a bank that had direct ties to Putin, and was paid $500,000 for that speech, which I believe lasted less than an hour. Not bad money. So again, if the Clintons do it, totally legitimate. Even though the Russian reset that Hillary was trying to work on never really took place. And let's not forget that Bill visited Putin one time without getting State Department approval. They didn't say he couldn't go, but he left before they said he could. Again, Clinton fine, Trump bad. With the aid of Fusion GPS, the Clinton campaign rolled out their master narrative on Trump-Putin collusion. A new orthodoxy immediately gripped the establishment press, which amplified the overwrought propaganda, complete with suggestions of dirty deals, dark conspiracies, and blackmail. It was Jeffrey Goldberg, the national correspondent, now editor of The Atlantic, a rag, who first trumpeted the new line. In his aptly titled article, It's Official, Hillary Clinton is running against Vladimir Putin, no hyperbole there whatsoever, Goldberg alleged that Trump has chosen to unmask himself as a de facto agent of Russian President Vladimir Putin. In Putin's puppet, Franklin Foer of Slate, a rag of a rag who can't even pay their rent and has had to move to much smaller quarters in New York, and I believe is still on the hook for back rent to their former leaseor, landlord, if you will. Franklin Foer of Slate examined the matter from the Russian side. Vladimir Putin has a plan for destroying the West, and that plan looks a lot like Donald Trump, he wrote. David Remnick's article discussing Putin's affinity for grainy sex videos made identical points. All three authors noted with grave concern the Russian ties of Paul Manafort and Carter Page. 3 articles hit on the exact same points, and they're trying to tell us that there's no absolute collusion between mainstream media outlets, both print and electronic. None whatsoever. If you remember Gamergate at all, I think you can pretty well expect that one day that's going to get blown wide open. With the exception of Fox News, the broadcast media beat the same drum. CNN might not have accused Page of masterminding the hack of the DNC, but it recognized a dangerous man when it saw one. On August 8th, for example, it devoted a long segment entirely to Page. What's really remarkable here, Jim Sciutto, I believe it's Sciutto, CNN's chief national security correspondent told anchorman Wolf Blitzer, a former journalist, is that Page's positions match almost word for word the positions of the Kremlin on, for instance, alleged U.S. orchestration of pro-democracy in and around Russia. And that is sparking concern from Russian experts and former policymakers, even inside the GOP. Excuse me, from Russia experts. It's not false. Not false at all. I mean, if we're going to put propaganda in front of Americans, I dare say we're going to put it in front of other countries too, those that we want to influence. So Page was sparking concern, even among never-Trump Republicans? How ominous. But imagine how much more ominous it would have sounded if journalists could have reported that Page was also sparking concern in the FBI. At that moment, John Brennan, then director of the CIA, was doing his damnedest to hand journalists precisely that story. John Brennan is a pig. Okay, we're going to break here. I'm going to come back at 25 after. Going to make some more coffee and walk around a little bit. So do what you need to do. I promise I'll start right on time. And if I don't, lash me with a wet noodle. You have my word. I will take it, and I won't love it. All right, I'll put up the break sign. I'll see you at 25 after. And we're back. Hope everyone had a decent break. And we're about halfway through. As I said, this is a very long article, but I think it's really important that we look at, and as I believe I termed it in the description, an exhaustive breakdown of the Russian collusion story, so you have a full understanding of what's going on. Obviously, I've interjected here and there, but the only false note out of this whole thing has really been the part about the overseas hacking of the emails. Again, they were stolen. They were not hacked. Direct download. Other than that, this article is just dead on, and I've read the whole thing previously, so I believe that's the only quibble I had with it. Okay, let's get started. While the establishment press was singing in harmony with the Clinton campaign, a cacophonous debate erupted inside government. At the end of July, James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, said at a public forum that the intelligence community was not ready yet to make a call on attribution. Not ready, that is, to attribute the DNC hack to Putin. Clapper was also unready to say that the intention of the hackers was to get Trump elected. The goal, he said, may simply have been to stir up trouble, quote unquote. When combined with similar comments by other intelligence officials, Clapper's statements undercut Hillary Clinton's efforts to brand Trump as Putin's active accomplice. Let's remember, too, that any of the three agencies that have come out and said that there was a Russian hack into the DNC servers, first of all, none of them said definitively that there was a hack. They just said there was a likelihood. I believe high likelihood was as far as they went. And they never, ever were able to physically examine those servers. The only people who got a look at the server, and we don't know if it was an unadulterated look or not, was a firm called CrowdStrike, which had previously been known for determining that Russia had hacked Ukrainian, or was it Georgian, artillery networks. That turned out to be completely false. They had to retract that. So their only claim to fame was actually ignominious. Yet the DNC picked them to go through their quote-unquote server. I shouldn't say quote-unquote server, but their valid copy of the server. CrowdStrike found a fingerprint of Russian hackers. Now, if you paid attention to WikiLeaks and the downloads and revelations of the CIA's hacking programs, you would know that, without a doubt, it's incredibly simple to hide your own tracks and leave the fingerprint of someone else in your place to misdirect people into looking at someone other than yourself, other than the actual hacker. Yet people took the CrowdStrike recommendation that there was a Russian fingerprint without any sort of what's what I'm looking for? I'm sorry, excuse me for a second. Without any sort of disbelief, I guess, whatsoever. They just took it on faith. A disgraced company looking at what may not have been an actual copy of the server finds a fingerprint that would have easily been left by someone who knew what they were doing. In fact, by anyone with the access to the CIA software that had been released online. Yet, this is supposed to be definitive. Enter, I don't even like to say this guy's name, enter John Brennan. In early August, Brennan launched a personal campaign to force a consensus in support of Clinton's propaganda. Before long, Clapper became his partner in this effort. They would succeed, however, only after the election, and then only by establishing an ad hoc and highly unorthodox intelligence assessment team. To man the team, Brennan and Clapper handpicked a small number of analysts, tasking them with reaching a consensus before the inauguration of Donald Trump. The team, no surprise, did not disappoint. In January 2017, it produced the quote-unquote consensus that Brennan had been trying to orchestrate for the previous 5 months. By then, it was still useful as a propaganda tool against President Donald Trump, though it had arrived far too late to help Hillary Clinton win the election. What a shame. Of course, Brennan has never admitted his political motives. Well, he's also an abject and proven liar. On the contrary, according to an in-depth Washington Post investigation based on interviews with either Brennan himself or people very close to him, the CIA director claimed to be in possession of eye-popping intelligence reports about the DNC hack. These reports supposedly captured Putin's specific instructions on the operation's audacious objectives, defeat or at least damage the Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton, and help elect her opponent Donald Trump, quote unquote. Yet, even if this intelligence trove actually did exist and truly did convince the CIA director, it obviously did not have the same persuasive impact on his colleagues as evidenced by Brennan's failure to deliver a consensus assessment of Putin's motives. In his mission to transform the intelligence community into an official choir of the Clinton campaign, which was done, Brennan ran up against a 6'7" wall in the form of James Comey. According to the New York Times, in August 2016, a critical split emerged between the CIA and counterparts at the FBI, where a number of senior officials continued to believe that Russia's cyber attacks were aimed primarily at disrupting America's political system and not getting Mr. Trump elected, quote unquote. As a component of this disagreement, Brennan may also have pressured Comey to investigate possible collusion with Russia by aides and associates of Trump. By law, the CIA cannot spy on Americans, even though we know it has. Only the FBI has the authority to investigate citizens. In fact, the CIA monitored the Senate at one time. But, who cares? But the CIA can share reports with the FBI about efforts by foreign agents to suborn individual Americans, and it can strongly urge the Bureau to take action on the basis of those leads. Brennan, it would appear, did just that in July 2016. That was the moment when the FBI opened a counterintelligence investigation into Russian efforts to influence the Trump campaign. Excuse me, my nose is itching. As we mentioned, Peter Strzok, who had been in charge of mid-year exam, the Hillary Clinton email investigation, took charge of this investigation too. The genesis and scope of it, however, is shrouded in a fog of deliberate misinformation. From the little we know, the probe seems to have centered on George Papadopoulos, a young foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign, and someone who was put off at every opportunity by Sessions and Manafort and anyone at the higher levels of the campaign. He kept trying to gin up his importance and kept trying to say, hey, I've got this contact with the Russians, we need to meet with them. He was rebuffed at every turn. Acting mostly on his own initiative, Papadopoulos had reached out to Russians in the hopes of brokering a meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And again, he never got anywhere with that. In the process, he may have bumped into Russian intelligence agents. I'd say there's a very high likelihood of that. Papadopoulos' activities took place primarily in London, a part of the world where the CIA has greater reach than the FBI. How did Comey come to learn of them? The answer is unclear, but certain clues point, of course, to Brennan. One of these is Brennan's own testimony before the House Intelligence Committee in March 2017. The CIA, he explained, had shared certain information with the FBI, in apparent reference to the Papadopoulos leads. This was information, he said, quote, that required further investigation by the Bureau to determine whether or not U.S. persons were actively conspiring, colluding with Russian officials, unquote. Was Brennan taking responsibility for kickstarting the investigation into the Trump campaign? He seemed to be saying that he had dropped the Papadopoulos file on Comey's desk and said, quote, investigate Trump. If this supposition about the origin of the investigation in July is correct, it may also help explain Brennan's behavior in late August when he grew increasingly exasperated with Comey. In an effort to gain allies, Brennan turned to friends in Congress for help. With the blessing of Obama, he organized a series of briefings for the so-called Gang of Eight, the Democratic and Republican leaders in both chambers of Congress. and the chairs and ranking minority members on the Senate and the House Intelligence Committees. According to the New York Times, Brennan told these senior lawmakers that he, quote, had information indicating that Russia was working to help elect Donald J. Trump president, unquote, a view that was not supported by an authoritative intelligence assessment. Obama and Brennan explained the briefings as an effort to forge bipartisan unity in the face of the Russian threat. But if Brennan couldn't force a consensus inside the intelligence community, how could he possibly convince Republicans and Democrats to join hands during a polarizing election, no less? This high-minded bipartisanship was simply a cover for a highly partisan move. The true motive of the briefings was to ventriloquize the Democrats on the Hill. If Brennan himself had gone public with his claims about Putin, he would have called down attacks on himself for passing off Clinton propaganda as an official intelligence assessment and for meddling as the director of the CIA in domestic politics. Never been done before. Never. Democratic lawmakers who received his briefings, however, operated under no such constraints. They were perfectly free to pass along Brennan's views to the public as their own. They became the ventriloquist dummies, moving their lips mechanically as the CIA director spoke. Brennan placed one of them center stage. On August 25th, he gave a briefing that differed from the others. He tailored its content especially to the bare-knuckle politics of its recipient, Senate Majority Leader and all-around miserable human being, Harry Reid. I'm editorializing you. Please excuse me. Rightfully, but still I am interjecting. During the 2012 election, Reid had assisted President Obama by falsely claiming that his Republican presidential challenger, Mitt Romney, had paid no taxes for 10 years. When later asked if spreading a false rumor wasn't reminiscent of McCarthyism, Reid responded, and this is priceless, "They can call it whatever they want. Romney didn't win, did he?" With the certain knowledge that Reid, who was in any case retiring after the 2016 election, thank God, would do whatever it took to win, Brennan indulged his own partisan political passions. He told Reid, according to the New York Times, that unnamed advisors to Mr. Trump might be working with the Russians to interfere in the election. That's completely specific. Unnamed advisors might be working with the Russians to interfere in the election. So we don't know who they are. We don't know if they're actually doing it. And it's not necessarily collusion to get Trump elected. It's just interference in the election. Well, we know there was interference in the election by the 13 Russian trolls. Very minute and very ineffective interference. But according to Reid, it could have actually been people in the Trump campaign doing that. A completely false allegation. But as we know from the previous quote, Reid doesn't give a shit. Reid doesn't care. If Reid's response is anything to go by, Brennan did much more than that. He briefed the senator on information taken directly from Steele's dossier, and he complained about the recalcitrance of the director of the FBI. 2 days after the briefing, Reid wrote a letter to Comey, which he immediately shared with the press, claiming there was a mounting evidence of a, quote, direct connection between the Russian government and Donald Trump's presidential campaign, unquote. Reid demanded that the FBI launch an immediate investigation. The American people, he wrote, deserve all the facts, quote, before they vote this November, unquote. The Trump campaign, Reid continued bluntly, quote, has employed a number of individuals with significant and disturbing ties to Russia and the Kremlin, unquote. He was particularly concerned with Trump associates who may have served as what he called, quote, complicit intermediaries, unquote, between the Russian government and hackers. The prospect of individuals tied to Trump, WikiLeaks, and the Russian government coordinating to influence our election raises concerns of the utmost gravity and merits full examination, Reid said. In an unmistakable reference to Steele's reports on Carter Page, Reid informed Comey that questions have been raised, quote unquote, about a Trump advisor who allegedly, and I quote again, met with high-ranking sanctioned individuals while in Moscow. And a sanctioned individual would be someone who is on U.S. intelligence radar as being connected to or an actual member of Russian intelligence. Serving as Brennan's dummy, Reed publicized the Marvel Comics rendering of Carter Page, and he demanded that the FBI launch an investigation on the basis of it. Before long, Comey would obey. Shortly after Reed's letter, Obama asked the FBI for an update on its investigation of Russian tampering with the election. The president, Lisa Page texts her lover Peter Strzok, wants to know everything we're doing. And I think you've seen the interview where Obama said explicitly and literally that he was not involved in any FBI investigations whatsoever, that he never got tangled up or led them in any direction whatsoever, that he was completely hands off. In fact, I believe, who was it? Was it Abedin or was it Smith, who had written a memo right after an Obama meeting where he said, we're taking a hands-off approach on this, which is, of course, a direct signal that we are putting our hands on this. The text probably refers to Obama's preparations for the G20 meeting in China, where he personally lodged a complaint with Putin about the Russian hacking. But the request is intriguing. Obama was engaging the FBI just as it stood ready to use the allegations of the Steele dossier as a basis for broadening its investigation of Trump. When Comey informed Obama about everything we are doing, did he discuss the Carter Page allegations? Did he note their source, Christopher Steele? And what about the president himself? Did Obama nudge Comey to comply with the demands of Brennan and Reed? I'm going to say yes, but I'm just one guy. Whatever signals the president may have sent, McCabe and his lovebirds certainly began supporting the efforts of Brennan and Reed to paint Trump as Putin's puppet. The form of support was nuanced and clandestine. If Peter Strzok and Lisa Page had contacted their favorite reporter, Devlin Barrett, and leaked the fact that a Trump advisor was coming under investigation, the leak would have implicated the FBI. Trump and his supporters would then have castigated Comey, accusing him of intervening in politics. To avoid such problems, the lovers used a pair of cutouts, intermediaries who laundered the FBI's information in the same way that Reed had laundered information for Brennan. Who better to play this role than the super duo Simpson and Steele? Either directly or through an intermediary, Strzok shared with Steele the news of the impending investigation of Carter Page. He did so with the certain knowledge that Steele would channel it to Simpson, who in turn would incorporate it into his standard press briefings. FBI representatives would later deny having used Steele as a cutout with the press, but their self-defense, as we shall see below, is demonstrably false. The experience of the journalist Julia, I believe it's Ioffe, demonstrates how diligent Simpson was at spreading the news that Strzok was surreptitiously feeding him. In mid-September, Ioffe published a profile on Carter Page for Politico. Not partisan by any stretch of the imagination. As I started looking into Page, she relates, I began getting calls from two separate corporate investigators, quote unquote, digging into what they claim are all kinds of shady connections Page has to all kinds of shady Russians. One of those investigators was presumably Simpson. The other one probably represented another dank corner of the Clinton demi-monde. Both emphasized, an allegation that came directly from Steele's dossier, namely that Page, during his trip to Moscow in July, had met with Igor Sechin, who was a key Putin ally and the chairman of the Russian state oil company. The quote-unquote corporate investigators, however, now had something else to push, something new and very newsworthy. The FBI was investigating Page. And remember all of the unmaskings of people who were swept up in what was known as inadvertent communications. People who were talking with people, foreigners, who were under the CIA umbrella of, who were being followed and monitored by the CIA. if their communications, if those foreigners' communications were interdicted by the CIA or the NSA, um, and um, they were talking to an American citizen, the American citizen's name would be redacted because the CIA cannot spy on American nationals. But the Obama administration was giving out the names of those people left and right. They were doing what's called unmasking. They were taking that redaction and making it a fact, putting a name on it. If I'm not mistaken, Obama's ambassador to the UN had over 100 unmasking requests. She says someone did them in her name, that she had no idea. I think, to use a phrase that the author of this piece is using, she was obviously a cutout. But again, one guy's opinion. As knowledge of the FBI's interest in Carter Page spread, Steele's credibility soared. To exploit the opportunity, Simpson flew Steele to the United States to brief select media outlets in person. Thanks to the information that McCabe's team was leaking to the press through Steele, Simpson could repackage the super spy. No longer just a former MI6 operative working as a quote-unquote independent researcher, Steele was now a trusted colleague of the FBI's. He possessed unique insight into the fears of American counterintelligence officials about Trump's nefarious relations with Putin. For the first time, Steele agreed to go on the record as a quoted source for journalists. Bad move, as we'll see in a bit. This round of briefings generated an article written by veteran Yahoo reporter Michael Isikoff, entitled U.S. Intel Officials Probe Ties Between Trump Advisor and Kremlin. It focused naturally on Carter Page. Isikoff reported that American officials had, quote, received intelligence reports, unquote, that Page had met with Session. At their alleged meeting, Isikoff reported, Session raised the issue of the lifting of sanctions with Page, the Western intelligence source said. A Western intelligence source? That would be Christopher Steele. By identifying the super spy in this manner, Isikoff disguises, wittingly or unwittingly, Steele's identity as a Clinton operative and as the author and disseminator of the reports in question. The moniker had the added benefit of making Steele seem to work for a Western government, creating the illusion of transatlantic trepidation about the cunning Carter Page. The evil, dreadful, gray spot, according to a boss, Carter Page. Excuse me just a second. By the way, this is Green Mountain Dark Magic. Made it through my Keurig. Awesome stuff. And of course, a Yeti tumbler. Gotta have a Yeti. Although, I will say, if you go and subscribe to the Daily Wire for the annual subscription, the Leftist Tears tumbler that you get as a bonus for that subscription is awesome. It's not technically as great as a Yeti, but for the speed that I drink things, it is totally adequate. It's lighter than a Yeti, and it has a rubberized bottom, so it sits more solidly on a smooth surface. Highly worth your money, just saying. Confirmation of the article's central claims came from two other sources. The first was a senior law enforcement official who told Isikoff that Page's meetings in Moscow were being looked at, quote unquote. Would that be Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, or Lisa Page? The second confirmation came from a congressional source familiar with briefings that lawmakers had received about Carter Page's meetings in Moscow. Would that be Harry Reid? I'm going to say yes on all counts. Certainly we know McCabe was not above leaking information. Strzok and Page are basically disgraced FBI agents. Remember, they were fairly high level on the Mueller investigation until their little tete-a-tete text messages had been revealed by the Inspector General. Let's keep in mind, though, that they were not demoted from the investigation until those texts were made public. Mueller knew about them months before he kicked them off the team. But Mueller's a Republican. We can trust him. Whether these indeed were the correct identities, it is obvious where Isikoff found his sources, on Glenn Simpson's Rolodex. Does anyone even have a Rolodex anymore? I wonder. Here was a story processed and canned in Fusion GPS's information factory. All Isikoff had to do was add water and shake. His sources were all part of a single network conspiring to hoodwink the public. Why did Comey participate in this fraud? Perhaps it was to get Brennan and Reed off his back. Substantial weights, to be sure. On the risk side of the ledger, the dangers were minimal. Today, the Isikoff article is a fingerprint on a hot bullet casing, an irrefutable proof placing the FBI at the scene of the crime. But in September 2016, the chances of anyone ever I'd like to see the Bureau tried, and as we saw in the Daily Caller article, they are now under investigation. Anyone ever tying the Bureau to it were negligible. Although the article announced with great flourish the opening of an investigation into Carter Page, it's not even clear that, at this point, Page was truly an official target of the probe. The important thing to Brennan and Reed was helping Hillary Clinton win the election. What they desired most from the FBI was a public statement that the Trump team was under investigation for conspiring with Putin. With the Isikoff article, Comey didn't fully satisfy them, but he threw them a bone. On the reward side of the ledger, he showed Hillary Clinton and her friends that he was, despite everything, a team player, and his contribution to the team effort was indeed significant. The FBI's leaks were indispensable in giving superflat Glenn Simpson a stable of seemingly independent sources willing to go on the record about the grave concerns sweeping the Western world about, of all people, again that gray spot, Carter Page. Mr. Page is not an advisor and has made no contribution to the campaign, said a Trump spokesman in relation to the media storm over the Isikoff article. If Carter Page thought this disavowal would return some normalcy to his life, he was sadly mistaken. It actually put a target on his back. So long as he was officially affiliated with the Trump campaign, Comey would no doubt hesitate to seek a surveillance warrant for fear of laying the FBI open to the charge of engaging in politically motivated spying, which they did. After the disavowal, Comey had more room for maneuver. He therefore gave the go-ahead to seek a surveillance warrant. Widening the probe to include Page carried a little additional risk for Comey, but not much. If Clinton were to win the election, as everyone expected, then she would certainly never punish him for the move. If Trump were to win and learn about the probe, it would certainly enrage him. Excuse me. Cat. Cut it out. But the investigation could also be useful as leverage. Peter Strzok put it well in a text to Lisa Page a month earlier. On August 15, 2016, referring to the possibility of a Trump victory, Strzok wrote, this is a fairly famous text, "I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy McCabe's office," McCabe is inferred, but rightfully so, "that there is no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. Strzok presumably was saying that more coffee. I don't need it for the caffeine. Caffeine and sugar don't affect me. I get no buzz from them whatsoever. And I don't know if I get a buzz from cocaine. Thank you, Cole Porter. But I do enjoy the taste, and I get a very dry mouth because of a medication that I take. It's a beta blocker, so I need this quite often, as you've noticed. Strzok presumably was saying that a counterintelligence operation against Trump and his team would give the FBI leadership a species of job insurance similar to the job insurance that J. Edgar Hoover enjoyed in his day. Presidents dared not fire Hoover because he kept a black book on all of them, as I stated previously. Strzok's team began the process of seeking a surveillance warrant on Carter Page from the court established by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, easy for me to say, known as FISA. The FISA court's proceedings are not public because they treat top secret intelligence. To seek a warrant against Carter Page required the FBI to show probable cause that he was acting as an agent of Russia. In preparation for the warrant application, the FBI flew Steele to Rome for a face-to-face meeting with his main FBI contact. According to the New York Times, the handler told Steele that the FBI would pay him $50,000 if he could get solid corroboration of his reports. It was an incriminating admission. As far as I know, that payment was never made because, as we've stated, these claims were never corroborated. Steele had no way to back them up. But it still is pretty telling that the FBI was willing to pay for this information as opposed to just, trying to get the intelligence from a member of the intelligence community, at least former member of a very well-known ally. It was in Steele's reports on Page's Moscow trip were 2 months old. The U.S. government, that is the FBI and the CIA, hadn't produced an iota of corroboration, and yet on the basis of those stale reports, it had suddenly decided to target Page as a probable agent of a foreign power. Why? Because without the Carter Page who appeared in the Steele dossier, without the Marvel Comics villain, there existed no credible intelligence pointing to a criminal conspiracy between Trump and Putin. If the investigation was to be sufficiently broad to dig up dirt on Trump, it had to include the fanciful allegations against Page. These, however, were impossible to corroborate because they were fictive. They did, however, include one claim that, if shorn of context, wasn't as transparently silly as the others, namely that Page had met with Sechin, the chairman of the Russian state oil company, which I believe is Gazprom. To be sure, Steele's report of the meeting contained the outlandish claim, this is incredible, that Page had negotiated with Sechin on lifting American sanctions against Russia. How could Page possibly have had the authority to try and negotiate such a deal at any stretch of the imagination? But if McCabe's team were to downplay this aspect as much as possible and focus instead on whether the meeting actually took place, it didn't, well, that could make it appear like a worrisome allegation calling out for a sober follow-up. And I believe this supposed meeting was the one that was supposed to have taken place in Vienna, which Carter Page has proven, beyond a doubt, he never visited, not even once. The super spy sprang into action. He tapped his daisy chain of paid Russian informants, and before McCabe's team submitted the FISA warrant application, he produced some short reports supposedly confirming the meeting with Sechin. Steele discovered in his network another source, the friend of one of Sechin's friends, who had heard from Sechin and from Sechin's personal assistant that indeed Sechin had met with Page. Confirmation? The source, in quotes again, also reported that Sechin offered Page, in return for Trump lifting of U.S. sanctions on Russia, a personal reward, a 19% stake in the Russian state oil company, a haul worth millions upon millions, or possibly billions. Well, if gas prices ever went up again, it would be billions, definitely. No mere criminal mastermind, Page was a master negotiator as well. Cartoonish depictions such as this constitute the primary basis on which the FBI made the case that Page was probably a foreign agent and that, in addition, he had probably broken American law, the legal standard for issuing surveillance warrants. The application for a warrant against Page is locked behind a top-secret classification. Trump could reveal that. If it was in his interests, I personally think it is, Trump could waive the classification and have that released. However, by not doing so, he's allowed the Inspector General in the new investigation against the FBI and its use of the FISA court to unearth that and declassify it on its own. So, if you subscribe to the notion of Trump playing 4D chess, time being the fourth dimension, you could make a case for it at this point. I don't know. I'm not a full proponent of 4D chess, but I'm not completely against it. I do know he definitely uses A/B testing as Six Hexenhammer 666 is so apt to point out, to decide on policy, for instance, as tariffs. He first announced blanket tariffs, and they were met with a huge backlash. The stock market went way down, and the Congress was going nuts. There were certain industries that were going nuts. And then Trump walked it back. Then it was just he was going to put trade sanctions on China. I'm sorry, he was going to negotiate those tariffs with certain countries, and he was not going to impose them on Canada and Mexico. We heard that there were certain European countries, including Great Britain, who were negotiating against those tariff threats. So it was working. And now he's walked it back even further, and the market is slowly, but in not quite leaps and bounds, but in jumps, going back to where it was before he announced the tariffs. Today was a down day, but only by a few tens of points. It wasn't any kind of a market correction or anything like that. Twitter is still doing great, and if you follow such things, Herbalife is at near $100 a share. A complete Ponzi scheme, in my opinion, that one very, very successful Wall Street hedge fund investor had bet against 2 years ago, saying that it would be at zero. So he shorted it by $1 billion. It was at about $40 a share when he did that. And instead of dropping, it's now up to almost 100. I was rooting for him, but he lost a lot of money. Back to the article. Sorry. But McCabe testified before the House Intelligence Committee in December 2017 that without Steele's information, the FBI could not have secured a surveillance warrant. And that is a direct quote. And according to Senators Chuck Grassley and Lindsey Graham, who have read the original warrant application and the 3 renewal applications, quote unquote, the bulk of the material on which the FBI made its case against Page, excuse me, the bulk of the material on which the FBI made its case against Page came in the Steele dossier. What is more, the application contained, in the words of the 2 senators, quote, no additional information corroborating the dossier's allegations, unquote. No additional information, that is, except for one newspaper article, the Isikoff speech. I'm going to mute my microphone for a second and try to really clear my throat. All right, that's better. McCabe's team supported an application based primarily on Steele's allegations by offering the judges an article that itself was based solely on Steele's reports. Double check that my mic is on. Good. I haven't been reading the titles to these sections, but this one is great. Alpha Schmalpha. Placing Page under surveillance marked the high point of the cooperation between McCabe's team and the super duo Simpson and Steele. But nefarious partnerships are prone to unravel, and when they do, they unravel quickly. Only 10 short days after McCabe's team pulled the wool over the eyes of the FISA court judges, Simpson and Steele broke off relations with the FBI in a fit of anger and bitterness. Now, you will possibly remember that when the Democrat side of the House Intelligence Committee came out with their own memo, supposedly refuting Devin Nunes' memo that had come out from the majority previously, they said that they told the FISA court that Steele was no longer associated with the FBI because they had cut ties with him due to his talking to reporters and outing himself as an FBI source. According to this right here, that happened 10 days after the initial FISA court application. So draw from that what you will. Relations started to fray amid an effort by the super duo to stage a repeat of their Isikoff triumph. At some point in October, Simpson brought Steele to the United States for a second round of in-person briefings with major news outlets. Unfortunately, Not one of these outlets has seen fit to disclose the subject of the briefings, so their precise details are sketchy. Still serving as FBI cutouts, the super duo probably updated reporters on the FISA warrant application and other aspects of the Trump-Russia investigation. If so, they may have intended for that information to serve as filler in articles about a new scoop that Simpson was offering reporters. A journalist whom Fusion GPS briefed at that time subsequently told the Washington Times that Simpson was pushing a story about a secret computer link-up between Trump and a Russian bank. And excuse me, I forgot to close OBS. I do apologize. And we know how quickly the Russian bank story fell apart, but it was quite popular in the news for a few weeks. According to the New York Times, news of the link-up had started to see the light of day thanks to the classified briefings that Brennan had organized for trusted Democrats on Capitol Hill. Intelligence officers disclosed, in the words of the Times, the possibility of financial ties between Russians and people connected to Mr. Trump, including a mysterious computer back channel between the Trump Organization and the Alfa Bank, which is one of Russia's biggest banks and whose owners have long-standing ties to Mr. Putin. John Brennan had designed those briefings to be leaky, so it should come as no surprise that word of the Alfa Bank investigation flowed directly to Fusion GPS. Following the winning formula that had produced the Isikoff article, Simpson provided reporters with the scoop. At first, the plan proceeded flawlessly. Franklin Foer, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, of Slate, ran a breathless story about the secret communications between the servers. I mean, Slate, they're the ones who ran the article 2 years ago, the opinion piece of a self-confessed pedophile who said that he is not a monster and he's never touched children and should not be regarded by society as something to be disdained at least. Come to find out later, through mining through his social media, he has touched children. This pedophile has touched children. Slate has since withdrawn those pieces, but you can find them on archive on the Internet Wayback Machine. I believe they were from September 25th of 2015, between the 25th and the 27th. So go to Wayback and you can find them pretty easily. Do we know with certainty that Foer's information came directly from Fusion GPS? No. It's certainly possible that, as we saw in the case of Julia Ioffe, some other agent emerged from the shadows of the Clinton demi-monde to serve it up to him. Whatever the source of the information, Foer thought he might just have discovered the greatest piece of incriminating evidence yet, and Hillary Clinton agreed. The speed and enthusiasm of her endorsement suggest more than a measure of coordination. She immediately sent not one, but 2 tweets flagging Foer's piece. One of them attached a statement from her campaign, which added heart palpitations and comic book imagery to Foer's breathlessness. Slate's discovery of a, quote, secret hotline, unquote, the statement said, might unlock the mystery behind Trump's love for Putin, and it might also explain why Russia was masterminding cyber threat designed to, quote unquote, hurt Hillary Clinton's campaign. The Clinton campaign called on the FBI to investigate. Clearly, this was the cue for McCabe's lovers to chime in. Their role was to affirm by means of a leak that the FBI was taking very seriously this threat to national security, investigating with all the diligence that the American people expected their premier law enforcement agency. Well, at one time, premier law enforcement, between dropping the ball on the Parkland shooting and the FISA application kerfuffle, the FBI isn't looking all that great. Oh yeah, I forgot. This just came out yesterday or the day before, that the guy who shot up Pulse nightclub, killed 50 people, injured another 52, I believe. His dad was an FBI informant. So the FBI was as close to the shooter as they could have been without watching him directly, which they had been for a period of time, and they knew nothing about what was going on. So either dad was a really tight-lipped informant, or, well, you draw your own conclusion. Ford's story came out on October 31st, a week and a day before the voters went to the ballot box. If McCabe's team had stuck to the script, the media would have spent the final week before the election talking of nothing but the secret hotline, quote unquote, that connected Putin to the lair of his evil minion high atop Trump Tower. But McCabe's team double-crossed Steele and Simpson, or so the super duo must have felt. On the same day the Slate article appeared, the New York Times reported that the FBI had investigated the link between Alpha Bank and Trump Tower. The Bureau, the Times said, had concluded that there could be an innocuous explanation, like a marketing email or spam, for the computer contacts, quote unquote. This single sentence wiped out weeks of diligent work by Fusion GPS. As if to console Simpson and Steele, the article did reveal that the FBI all summer long had been conducting an investigation into the potential ties between the Trump campaign and Russia, and the Times even disclosed details of the probe, information that came courtesy, one assumes, of briefings from Fusion GPS. Well, it was either Fusion GPS or the FBI. I would lean more towards Simpson. If you see his testimony before Congress, you'll see that the guy has really no credibility whatsoever. It's a very pathetic performance. Now, let's just stop for a second. I won't take too long on this, but remember, Trump had stated before this that he was being wiretapped. The word he used, wiretapped, by Obama at Trump Tower. People gave a lot of crap to Trump for using the word wiretap because that statute talks about basically hard landlines and telegraphs, stuff that just isn't in use anymore except by people who want very secure communications. Then you would use a landline, or a scrambled phone. But they said, well, Trump doesn't know what he's talking about because he said wiretap. Well, the Wall Street Journal, actually I believe it was the New York Times, ran a headline about the surveillance, and they used the word wiretap. No one gave them guff for it. I almost said it. So, again, a double standard. And it's been shown that they were, in fact, surveilled. The servers right here, they were being looked at. So Trump had it right. As if to console Simpson and Steele, the article did reveal that the FBI... I'm sorry, I already read that. Let me move up. But to Simpson and Steele, the inclusion of those details was the bitterest of consolation. The damage the Times visited on their propaganda campaign was not limited to undermining the Alpha Bank story. The article included two additional facts, each as destructive as the other. The FBI's wide-ranging investigation into Trump had revealed no collusion with Putin, and the FBI did not even believe that Putin was trying to get Hillary Clinton elected. In a convulsive fit of journalistic integrity, the Times had rejected Fusion GPS's master narrative, and it had done so on the basis of authoritative leaks from the FBI. Someone in the J. Edgar Hoover building had dropped a pallet of bricks on Simpson and Steele. Who? The collapse of the secret hotline story was part of a larger falling out between the FBI and the super duo, and not by any means the most important part. The event that truly doomed their relations was an announcement on October 28th that the FBI was reopening the Clinton investigation, the email investigation. And the character standing at the center of that decision was James Comey. Let's remember, Clinton's under a lot of investigations right now. There's the email investigation. There's the grand jury that has most likely been impaneled for the Clinton Global Initiative and Clinton Foundation. Authorities that were never even registered as charitable organizations, by the way. And their taxes are an absolute Byzantine mess. So getting through those is going to take some time. But it's going to happen, in my opinion. It's going to happen. I don't remember if there's a Uranium One thing going on right now or not. There could be. Let me know in the comments if that's true. The event that truly doomed their relations was an announcement on October 28th that the FBI was reopening the Clinton email investigation. I already read that, excuse me. And the character standing at the center of that decision was James Comey. The Bureau had learned that Uma Abedin, Hillary Clinton's trusted right hand, had forwarded thousands of emails to a computer in her home, which Anthony Weiner had put to personal use. Weiner was a former congressman, and he was Abedin's husband. But he was also a criminal under investigation by the FBI. In her quote-unquote well-intentioned but careless use of government correspondence, Abedin had streamed thousands of official emails to the laptop of a pedophile. That's one other quibble I have with this article. Weiner is not a pedophile. He's an abebophile, which is someone who is attracted to young, post-pubescent girls, not children, which is what a pedophile is. A distinction that I feel should be made, because I believe the girl that he was sexting, the young one, was somewhere around 15, which is, of course, entirely abhorrent. I would not countenance anything like that. But and he's serving jail time for it. Not enough, in my opinion, but he did go to jail for it. So there is some justice in the world. Track this up. James Comey's July statement closing the Clinton email case coincided with Guccifer's 2.0's release of the DNC emails, and it helped build the impression of Hillary Clinton as the entitled CEO of Clinton Incorporated. This reopening of the case, coming just a week before the election, was also timed for maximum visibility and carried a similar political valence. It was the third in a string of blows that Clinton received in the final stage of the election. The first came at a September 11th memorial commemoration in New York, where she had stumbled badly and seemed to faint, and seemed to be, if I can interject, thrown into the back of that van like a bag of potatoes. Raising doubts about her stamina and intelligence from her, raising, I read a little ahead there. Did sound good though, doesn't it? Raising doubts about her stamina and health. On October 7th, WikiLeaks published the first trove of emails stolen, and again, no, presumably by Russian intelligence, allegedly, not presumably, from her campaign manager, John Podesta. The emails were further grist for the mill of those who argued that Bill and Hillary Clinton were running a Tammany Hall for the 21st century. Tammany Hall being a notorious political machine in the 1800s that was running New York City, and the boss, I think his first name was John, but definitely the last name was Tammany, again, Tammany Hall, ran it as his own personal fiefdom. Any political appointee was through graft, or what's the word when you give someone who's a relative an appointment? Anyway, he did that, or through pure graft. So there was no democratic system in place during the Tammany Hall thing whatsoever. It was brought down by a cartoonist by the name of Ogden Nash, quite famous, one of the very first political cartoonists to have actually made a difference in what he was doing. I would recommend looking him up. He's quite a fascinating person. And his drawings were absolutely masterful. Lost my place, of course. There we are. With Clinton stumbling, both literally and figuratively, the director of the FBI seemed determined to knock her back down. What was he thinking? Comey now claims that he assumed Hillary Clinton would win, as did Hillary Clinton. He feared that, after the election, people would come to learn that he had hidden the issue of Abedin's laptop from the public, and they would accuse him of giving unfair consideration to Clinton. He already had by not recommending to Loretta Lynch that she be indicted. That calculation may indeed have been part of his thinking, but he may also have been hedging against a Trump victory. The announcement about the laptop was a card that he could play to ingratiate himself with Trump, to offset the damage of the leaks about the Russia investigation. On top of those machinations, there was the old story, Comey's love of the spotlight. Here he was again in a national drama, playing the entirely principled and apolitical lawman. He was in Joe Friday heaven. For their part, Clinton and her camp read the FBI director's move as treachery most vile. In a scream of rage masquerading as a letter to Comey, Harry Reid spoke for the team. Comey, he wrote, was breaking the law by engaging in partisan political activity in support of Trump, whereas Comey never hesitated to publicize damaging innuendo against Clinton. He was protecting Trump from public humiliation. It has become clear that you possess explosive information about close ties and coordination between Donald Trump, his top advisors, and the Russian government, a foreign interest openly hostile to the United States, which Trump praises at every opportunity, Reid fumed. The public has a right to know this information. To underscore that point, he published the letter immediately. Glenn Simpson and Christopher Steele shared the sense of betrayal. Simpson later testified to the House Intelligence Committee. At that point, I felt like the rules had just been thrown out and that Comey had violated one of the more sacrosanct policies, which is not announcing law enforcement activity in the closing days of an election. Well, when has that ever come up before? Honestly, can anyone remember when you've had a political candidate making such broad and easily seen violations of federal law on the heels of the November vote? Honestly, I've been around since Nixon. Actually, I remember Kennedy's burial, to be honest. And I don't remember anything like that, except perhaps the Nixon 1972 electoral win. But the Watergate investigation had really not gained any steam by that point in time, so I don't think that counts. We decided that if James Comey wasn't going to tell people about this investigation that, he had violated the rules. What rules? The Marquis, the boxing rules. Marquis de, my brain. We had violated the rules. It would only be fair if the world knew that both the candidates were under FBI investigation. So Simpson and Steele, quote unquote, began talking to the press. And with that, the super duo brought about the end of their secret partnership with McCabe's team. The Bureau expects its cutouts to behave as cutouts. That is to say, they must launder secrets. Sensitive and classified information must never appear in the press in a form that betrays its FBI origins. Comey announced the reopening of the Clinton email case on Friday, October 28th. Simpson moved quickly. He arranged a Skype interview between Steele, who was now back in London, and David Corn, a veteran journalist at Mother Jones. Now, if you saw my video where I read the Democratic response to the Nunes memo, I got Corn and Isikoff mixed up. Isikoff was with one paper, and Corn was with Mother Jones. I got that wrong. So if you watch that video and you're wondering why I kept referring to Isikoff as Mother Jones, because I have the brain of a steel trap that is rusted shut. Excuse me for that. On October 31st, Corn reported that a quote-unquote former senior intelligence officer for a Western country who specialized in Russian counterintelligence told him, quote, that in recent months he provided the Bureau with memos based on Russian sources contending that the Russian government has for years tried to co-opt and assist Trump before Trump ever thought about running for the 2016 election. I believe he tried to run on an independent or Democratic ticket in 2004. Anyway. And that the FBI requested more information from him, unquote. The FBI response, Steele told Corn, was, quote, shock and horror, unquote. In August, I'm sorry, my chair, please excuse me. In August, the FBI asked for more of Steele's memos. Quote, it's quite clear that there was or is a pretty substantial inquiry going on, unquote. To ensure that Corn understood the nature of the inquiry, Steele shared with him the text of the reports that he had given to the Bureau. Remember, these were reports that he would not allow reporters early on to see um, and keep. So now he's showing them again. I don't know if he allowed people like Korn or Isikoff to retain any kind of notes or copies of them after that. I have a feeling, though, he was getting quite desperate and may have done so. Steele's decision to expose his partnership with the FBI gave McCabe's team no choice but to terminate the relationship. The breakup was ugly, but its very messiness would later prove useful. In late 2017, congressional investigators would begin questioning the FBI's senior leaders about the role Steele had played as a cutout. The senior leaders would point to the breakup as proof of the FBI's integrity. Snicker. Steele, they said, had been lying all along to the Bureau about his work with journalists. McCabe's team had no idea that he was funneling the FBI's secrets to the media. It was the Mother Jones interview that alerted them to Steele's duplicity. The moment it became clear, they immediately terminated the relationship. That alibi won't wash. McCabe's team was fully aware in September that Steele stood behind the Isikoff article. In fact, the appearance of a quote, senior U.S. law enforcement official, unquote, in the article implicates McCabe's team more or less directly. Remember, senior U.S. law enforcement is FBI or Department of Justice, which is over the FBI, and Western intelligence source would be Steele. Notice that they've used those same descriptions for all these different articles. So again, Simpson is feeding them this, and they're taking it right at face value. In short, Steele's FBI handlers were aware of his role in leaking information at that time, and it caused them no consternation. On the contrary, after the Isikoff article, the FBI drew Steele even closer, flying him to Rome and offering him $50,000. His work as a cutout received further tacit commendation when McCabe's team used the Isikoff article to dupe the FISA court judges. And again, from the Nunes memo, part of the FISA application was most likely the Papadopoulos case, which had no relation to this whatsoever, and then the Steele dossier, and the Isikoff article, which was supposed to be shown as backing up the Steele dossier, when in fact it was circular reasoning, because the Isikoff article was based on the Steele dossier. So you have one supporting the other, supporting the other. That's going to come out in this investigation, and it's going to be very, very bad for the FBI, in my opinion. On the contrary, after the Isikoff article, the FBI drew Steele even closer, flying him to Rome and offering him $50,000, which again they never paid. His work as a cutout received further tacit commendation. I'm sorry, I read that already. Please excuse me. The troubles that eventually befell Steele and McCabe's team have no bearing on the simple facts. They worked as partners in prosecuting a campaign of innuendo against Carter Page in September, and again in placing him under surveillance in October. What is more, the surveillance order went beyond McCabe's team to the highest levels in the FBI and the DOJ. James Comey had to sign off on that decision, and that fact implicates him in a serious abuse of power. Steele's description of Carter Page's activities in Moscow is comical. We have a word to describe the use of fabricated evidence to make an innocent man appear guilty. The Obama administration framed Carter Page. But not only Carter Page. According to Steele's dossier, Page was in Moscow to cut a deal on another's behalf. He was an emissary, the trusted agent of Donald Trump. Without Steele's allegations against Carter Page, without, that is, the story of Page negotiating with Sechin to remove the sanctions, there was no credible allegation of Trump-Putin conspiracy. Okay, now here it's saying that the Sechin meeting was in Moscow. I had understood it was in Vienna. I'm probably wrong. Let's go with the article. This is much better research than you could count on my memory. The FBI, therefore, carried out a campaign of innuendo against Donald Trump in September, and the Obama administration placed him under investigation in October, if not earlier. The Obama administration framed Donald Trump. During the Watergate scandal, the press popularized the phrase the non-denial denial. The Nixon White House, and I remember this very well, had a special talent for issuing statements that sounded like categorical denials of allegations, but that, upon close parsing, affirmed them to be true. In the matter of the Steele dossier, Obama officials, some of their allies in Congress, and senior leaders in the FBI have developed an analogous ploy, the quote-unquote non-verification verification. These are statements that distance the speaker from the laughable fantasies of the Steele dossier while still affirming that the tale of collusion it weaves must be taken seriously. The unrivaled master of the move is John Brennan, Prince of Darkness. He took over the nom de guerre from what was his name in the Bush White House. Sorry, there is a previous Prince of Darkness, but I've moved that on to John Brennan. In a recent appearance on NBC's Meet the Press, Brennan defended the FBI's use of the Steele dossier in its FISA warrant application. He railed against the FBI's critics, whom he depicted as partisan hacks. He played the role of sober intelligence professional, a role he's still playing. Expressing his personal appraisal of the dossier when he was still director of the CIA, he said, "There were findings in that dossier that made me wonder whether or not they were, in fact, accurate and true." Exactly what things? Was it the dossier's view of Page as the diabolical mastermind of the DNC hack that struck the CIA director as credible? Avoiding the dossier's specific allegations, Brennan maintained his front and asserted, with the somber tone of a buttoned-down national security professional, that Steele's reports contained valuable intelligence leads. "I think Jim Comey has said that it contained salacious and unverified information," Brennan continued. "Just because it was unverified doesn't mean it wasn't true." Quote unquote from Brennan. The non-verification verification is central to the distinctive nature of the Obama administration's abuse of power. Most of our debate has focused on how the FBI used the Steele dossier to validate the investigation of Carter Page. This issue is important to be sure, but it must not deflect us from seeing that the reverse is also true. The administration deliberately used the investigation of Page to validate the dossier. Again, circular reasoning. Consider again the coy Brennan. When questioners push him to explain what in the Steele dossier he finds compelling, he habitually takes shelter behind secret sources, evidence hidden behind a classified screen where only he, the chief intelligence professional, was permitted to see it. I was aware of intelligence about contacts between Russian officials and U.S. persons that raised concern in my mind about whether those individuals were cooperating with the Russians, and it served as the basis for the FBI investigation to determine whether such collusion or cooperation occurred. Thank you, John Brennan. John Brennan sees the things that we cannot see. If he indeed has access to secrets that transform stories from Marvel Comics into the stuff of everyday reality, then he has done a very poor job of explaining what they are. Moreover, no disinterested intelligence professional has supported him. Brennan's somber and self-righteous appeal to hidden secrets is the oldest con in the book. Just replace his top-secret computer monitor with a crystal ball or dried chicken bones, and his scam is the same one that gypsy fortune tellers ran on superstitious peasants in early modern-day Europe, or that soothsayers were operating in Homer's Greece. I love that sentence. It's my favorite sentence of the article. With respect to the framing of Trump, however, the Second Sight scam required elaborate orchestration, the work of many hands. The key was the double tracking of the dossier. Hillary Clinton's enablers channeled it simultaneously into the press and into the government. They then recruited people inside government to verify to the outsiders that it was a serious document, a guide to the intelligence that reporters were not allowed to see. Without this double tracking and official or quasi-official authentication, journalists would never have believed that they were catching a glimpse of what Brennan and the FBI saw in their crystal balls. Pardon me, their top secret monitors. And without leaks about investigations, journalists would have had no dossier-related news to report. Official statements that the dossier was being looked into, quote unquote, transformed it into a legitimate topic for reputable news outlets. This con failed in its primary goal of preventing the election of Trump, but it was nevertheless a partial success. It instilled in a significant portion of the American public the conviction that Trump indeed conspired with Putin. This conviction is especially prevalent among the lofty-minded, a class of people that includes Republicans as well as Democrats. You're seeing this unravel more and more in the mainstream media. They're not leaning on the collusion story near as much as they were even a month ago. They have been recycling old stories, the most favorite of mine being the Trump Jr. meeting with Natalie Velasquez, I believe her last name is, the Russian lawyer who said she had dirt on Hillary, but according to accounts on both sides, actually tried to get them to work on removing the Magnitsky Act, a act against Russia for the killing of a Russian lawyer named Magnitsky, who was investigating Russian corruption in the case of their basically railroading an American securities firm operating out of Russia, that had offices in Russia, and just basically trying to take it over in one fell swoop and kick everybody associated with it right out of the country. So she was working on that. Yeah, Valenskaya. Yeah, and they've been recycling that story, which was put to rest last year. But they're bringing it up again, trying to restart the whole collusion thing, and collusion not even being an illegal term. There's no law against quote-unquote collusion. So that word is just loaded without any real meaning. That's about the most recent thing that they've come up with. So they're backing away from the Trump-Russia collusion and trying to put it on Trump Jr. now. And of course, there's the tragedy in Florida and the Stormy Daniels affair, really. There was just the one that they're playing up to the hilt. I mean, Anderson Cooper interviewing her on 60 freaking minutes for double the length of time on a normal interview. A porn star who had sex with Donald Trump before he was even running for office? Why would that be considered news? The only part of that affair that myself and a number of people have pointed out would be considered news was if that payoff to her during the 2016 election cycle violated Federal Election Commission rules. If it did, they would be in line for a fine. It's not a criminal offense, it's a finable offense. But Hillary Clinton's in line for a fine because her campaign did not disclose why they were funneling all that money to Perkins Coie, who were then funneling that money to Fusion GPS, who were then funneling money to Christopher Steele. And Bernie Sanders' campaign is under investigation for an FEC violation, although I can't remember what for. So there's plenty of that mud to be slung around, folks. All right, let's get to this. The bipartisan character of the delusion was the greatest factor that legitimated. I don't think I've ever seen the word legitimated before. The appointment of Robert S. Mueller III, the special counsel leading the investigation into Trump's alleged relations with Russia. The lofty-minded have greeted every indictment that Mueller has handed down as confirmation of their collusion delusion. In reality, those indictments only prove that a phalanx of crack investigators armed with nearly unlimited resources, a grand jury, and an expansive mandate can draw blood almost at will. An investigation, by the way, that has spent over $8.4 million so far. I got that figure from Hard Bastard, a channel that you really should look into. He has Hard Bastard and Hard News Network. Hard News Network is the smaller of the two, but the diehards are in that one. Hard Bastard is for the happy-go-lucky types. Don't hold me to that. Um, if a similar failings were to target Hillary Clinton and the shenanigans surrounding the Clinton Foundation, how much blood would flow? In other words, Mueller's indictments are just the latest form of the non-verification verification. Regardless of Mueller's intentions, his probe serves as precisely the kind of quote-unquote insurance policy that Strzok seems to have been discussing with his lover Lisa Page in August 2016. Trump cannot shut down the Mueller probe and excise the rot in the DOJ and the FBI without appearing to obstruct justice. In practical terms, then, the Mueller probe is the cover-up. Now, there are people who will make a case for Trump to dump Mueller right now, to fire him. The last I had heard, Mueller was starting to look into Trump's finances. And when the probe had first started, Trump had said that was his line in the sand, his red line for the investigation. He would go along with it up to that point. If it started to look into that, then he would cut them off. Now, here's the thing. Trump has been under investigation for tax fraud and things like that since the 90s. And the only thing that has ever been come up with is the money laundering that went on at the Trump casino in Atlantic City. I believe it was with the Russian mob. And it came down to a fine. They cleaned the place up. There's never been another hint of scandal since then. And remember, the Hillary campaign had every opportunity, and when I say Hillary campaign, I mean the DNC too, had every opportunity to come up with bad financial information on Trump during the election cycle. And they got nothing. Nothing. The closest they could come up with was that bank communication, which, as we saw, was bunk, and nebulous claims of Trump having financial dealings with the Russians that put him in bed with them and had him in their debt. The only financial dealings that have been proven Trump ever had with the Russians was discussions about building a skyscraper, another Trump Tower, if you will, in Moscow. And that fell through. No money ever changed hands. That's all they've got. Yet they've been pushing that narrative. That's another one they've pushed rather recently. I'd forgotten that. Of course, the lofty-minded refuse to see it this way. The political damage that Mueller's team is inflicting on Trump helps explain why a surprising number of people mount passionate and sincere defenses of the dossier and the super spy who compiled it. The logic of partisan politics will always lead a significant percentage of people to insist, with varying degrees of true belief, that a sow's ear really is a silk purse. But partisanship is not by any means the only factor at work here. Even people with well-deserved reputations for intellectual seriousness passionately defend the integrity of Christopher Steele, a man whom the New York Times insists on calling, despite all contrary evidence, quote-unquote, a whistleblower. Look up the definition whistleblower and tell me if that applies to Christopher Steele. I won't go into what my understanding of the definition, but I think if you go ahead and take a look, you'll see that that term has absolutely no meaning when it comes to Steele whatsoever. It doesn't in any way relate to him. For a complete understanding of the dossier's tenacious hold on lofty minds, one must supplement conventional political analysis with psychology. What we are witnessing is nothing less than a textbook case of denial and projection, the most perfect case imaginable. The event that shaped the dossier more than any other was the hack of the DNC. Guccifer 2.0 first began releasing documents on June 15th. A week later, Steele produced his first report. I have always contended that the real reason behind the Trump-Russia investigation was not the Papadopoulos meeting with whatever Russian contact he had purported to be involved with, a setup, in my opinion, especially the fact that the Australian ambassador, I believe they refer to him as a different, by a different title, or he has a slightly different job in the Australian government, but someone who has direct ties to the Clinton Foundation met with him, and somehow they both got drunk enough to the point where Papadopoulos, began bragging about his Russian contacts and the fact that they had the emails that the Trump campaign had jokingly asked for. Um, and again, this is, in my opinion, Papadopoulos just blowing himself up, making himself to be an important person, when in fact he had no pull in the campaign whatsoever. As was stated previously in this article, they were trying to just flesh out some kind of a foreign policy group within the campaign because they had been getting hit on not having one, and they were hiring people willy-nilly. Um, Papadopoulos, as I understand in his resume that he gave to the Trump campaign to get the job, listed his role in, I believe it's called the Junior UN or something like that, which is basically a kids level UN, high school students, maybe some college students, not an adult job by any stretch of the imagination. It would be like me listing on my resume right now, trying to get a job as a high level chef at a five-star restaurant that I used to wash dishes at an Italian pizza place. Honestly, I believe that's as far as it goes. The Hillary Clinton that emerged from the DNC emails was preternaturally unsuited to a populist moment. Here she was, the Hillary Clinton who made high-priced speeches to Wall Street on the eve of the Iowa caucuses. Here was the co-executive of the international slush funds of the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Global Initiative. Here was the power-hungry political boss who worked with the DNC to fix the Democratic primaries. Clinton supporters instinctively understood the size of the wound that the hack opened up, and they worked frantically to cauterize it, which meant deflecting attention from the greed, entitlement, and sleaze that characterized Clinton Incorporated. We're in the home stretch here, folks. The dossier quickly became a tool for denying the deficiencies of Bill and Hillary Clinton, projecting them onto Donald Trump. Is Bill Clinton a sexual predator? That's nothing. Trump pays teams of prostitutes to pee on him. Did Hillary Clinton preside over the failed Russian reset? That's nothing. Putin is blackmailing Trump, and he fears Hillary. Did Bill Clinton pocket a $500,000 fee, for a speech he gave in Moscow shortly before the sale of American uranium to Russian interests? 20% of American uranium stocks, by the way. That's nothing. Trump's been dependent on Putin for years. Do the emails from the DNC prove that Hillary Clinton rigged the primaries? That's nothing. Trump conspired with Putin to rig the entire election. In the wake of the DNC hack, leading figures in the press and senior officials in the Obama administration faced a choice. They could depict Carter Page as he really was, an unknown man of modest accomplishments who played no role of note in the Trump organization, or they could conspire with Fusion GPS to promote the fiction that he was a sly operative in a sinister network. In a fateful choice, they opted for dishonesty and deception over truth. Once the enablers of Hillary Clinton compromised their own integrity, they internalized her program of denial and projection. Their own egos are now invested in perpetuating it. To avoid owning up to their shortcomings, they insist in ever shriller tones on the personal integrity of the super spy and the credibility of his reports. The mere acknowledgement of a simple truth that the quote-unquote dossier is junk would constitute an admission of either deep professional malfeasance or of gobsmacking gullibility. I believe that places like CNN and MSNBC, the New York Times, and the Washington Post are never going to publish anything that admits to their absolute idiocy in promoting the Russia-Trump collusion story. They had absolutely no credibility left, and they can't afford to admit to it. So they're going to gloss over it. Again, they're going to push any kind of tragedy in the news as far as they can, as long as it doesn't involve a good guy with a gun stopping the bad guy with a gun, because that's against narrative, or Maybe they're going to go back to Puerto Rico and the fact that there are places still without power and water. Um, I don't know, but they're never going to admit to the fact that they've been carrying Hillary Clinton and John Brennan's water this entire time. Never. I hope I'm wrong. I hope they fall down in flames, but that's the way I see it. Choose your poison. You duped people and thereby abetted a gross abuse of power, or you were yourself badly duped. That is the dilemma that the lofty-minded now face. The choice is excruciating. It requires abandoning self-satisfying images and embracing painful self-truths, while also handing a well-deserved victory to a hated political enemy. As a consequence, the Steele dossier has proved to be as consequential as it is. Of course, no one is in deeper denial than Hillary Clinton herself. After she had concluded to Trump on the night of the election, Obama called her. Taking the phone, she said, "Mr. President, I'm sorry." This was before she got completely hammered, I guess. Oh, wait, no, she conceded the next morning, if I'm not mistaken. So she would have been floating on about 8 pitchers of coffee by then, according to reports. Sorry, no doubt, that the baton had fallen to the ground once again. Sorry that she would not be the first female president. Sorry that she would not hold the reins of power. But was contrition an aspect of any component of her sorrow? If there is one thing Hillary Clinton does not do well, it is contrition. In an interview last September, she clung to the fiction that the election was stolen. Her belief that Trump conspired with Putin was absolute. There certainly was communication, and there certainly was an understanding of some sort, Clinton said. She had no doubt that Putin sought a Trump victory and that there was a tangle of financial relationships between Trump and Russia, and that Trump's associates worked really hard to hide their connections with the Russians. Were those, in her mind, clear signs of collusion? I'm convinced of it, she said. She will remain convinced until the day she dies. The alternative, a rigorous examination of conscience, is too painful to contemplate. How much longer will Hillary Clinton's damaged psyche hold America hostage? So 2 things here to wrap up. First of all, Hillary Clinton and her denial of the truth. The DNC has refused to do an autopsy of the campaign, a campaign that spent $1.2 billion over Trump's estimated $700 million and lost badly. They will point to winning the popular vote, but that's because the coasts love Hillary, and the coasts are where the population centers are. If you look at the rest of the country, for the most part, they went for Trump. Now, recently, she has called those places basically backwater, race relations denying or antagonists and non-productive members of society. And that's how she's staying in the news. She's not staying in the news because she's an abject criminal. She's staying in the news because she's an idiot and basically lame, not being able to walk down steps. Maybe she wore the wrong shoes. I don't know. But the rest of this is basically an incredibly detailed and exhaustive summation of the Trump-Russia collusion situation, of the narrative, how it came to be. And again, I don't think he stressed enough the Hillary campaign's ginning up of the whole thing when they saw they were starting to lose traction after Hillary's deplorable comment. So I think he could have made more mention of that. But that may be just a pet theory of mine. Maybe I'm inaccurate in that regard. But the rest of this article is just spot on, except for the couple points that I made during it. Let's see, the hack being an international thing, and I think the other one was just Wiener being a pedophile instead of an abebophile. Other than that, I can't see any fault with this article. So take it to heart. Again, this was an incredibly long article. I apologize for anyone who stayed this entire time. Oh, hey, Ashley O. I do apologize for not seeing your comment earlier. I've been really, really studying the words not to screw up as often as I have. So thank you for the thumbs up. I really appreciate it. But this has gone on since 4 o'clock, and it's now almost 9 o'clock. I can't believe how, or I mean 7 o'clock. I can't believe how long it's taken. But I think that this was incredibly important. And I'm glad that even if you weren't here for the live stream, you're taking the time to watch it after it's posted to YouTube to stand on its own. Because this needs to be disseminated. This needs to be shared. Um, People need a firm grounding in what's happened so far with the Russia collusion probe, especially in light of how Mueller's come up with nothing so far, except for those 13 trolls, which the Obama administration knew about and did nothing to coerce. I mean, roll up. Somehow it had to wait until Mueller to get that done, which is just shameful. Um, and again, Obama knew that there was meddling going on in the election during the final run and chose to say nothing. So he knew Hillary was going to win, and he decided, well, we don't need to talk about it right now because she'll win and it'll just be glossed over and no one will ever know. So the Mueller probe actually worked against Obama in that regard. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for tuning in to Hats Gorilla News, to the 3/28/2018 live stream. I hope to do more of these in the future. I am trying to build this channel up, so please, if you feel this article was of note and this video had something to add to your conversation with other people, share it and describe it to others. I'm trying to break through the 100 subscriber barrier so I can start to do some other things with YouTube, and that would be of a great help. I'm currently at 35, and this is a brand new channel. I know we'll get there together. I know we'll get there. Please like and again share this. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And don't forget, links are in the description to this article, the Guccifer 2.0 WordPress page, and the links to my other channel, AHNC All Hat No Cattle, where I've been doing some live streams as well. Tomorrow, I will not be doing an AHNC live stream. I will be coming back here and doing another Hats Gorilla News live stream. As I mentioned earlier, in case you missed it, it'll be about YouTube's new gun control policy and what I'm doing in my small part to combat it. So please tune in tomorrow. That'll be at 4 o'clock Central Time, as close to on the dot as I can possibly make it, here on Hats Gorilla News. Until then, be well and good night.